Hey guys, it's Kevin again, and yes, we are finally here to do this video. I know I said back in September that I was planning to do a video kind of catching up on the films that I did not get a chance to review individually. But that video was put on the back burner for a bit. I just had a lot of things going on, and I just didn't really have the time to fit it in. But we're finally here. It's November, probably a good time to go ahead and finally do this video. Now, I will say that since it has been a little bit, this video actually is going to be in two parts. This is the summer section of the video. I'm going to do another video doing the September and October portion of the video, and then from that point forward, I'm just going to try to do individual reviews from there, just so I don't have a plethora of videos to do. I feel like this is the best way to possibly condense it. Just a couple disclaimers though right off the bat is that this is not going to be the most comprehensive video. These are movies that, yes, I initially planned to do longer reviews for, but just because I don't want this video to be 4 hours long, I'm gonna try to keep this a bit more brief than possible. I don't know if that's something I'm capable of, to be honest with you, because you guys know me. When I'm passionate about something, I just go and I just kind of start gushing about it. But I'm gonna try my best to talk about these films in the most brief, but I think the most substantive way possible, as a way so I can still give my thoughts and do it in a way that feels full, but not in a way that feels as, it's not going to be as expanded upon as maybe it would have, if that really does make sense. Also, again, this is only going to be these are only going to be films that I was planning to do individual reviews for. The what I watched thing, that's going to happen at some point, probably the end of this month. At this point, I'm planning to do one for January through April, one through May through August, and then kind of just go from there. But either way, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into it. This video is taken far too long to get done, so let's just go ahead and just jump right into it. So the first film we're going to be talking about, and immediately, this is why I'm a little bit upset that I had to do this video just in one, and because this is a film that I really wish I got to do a full review for, but that is I Saw the TV Glow, a movie that I just feel like everybody really needs to watch. This was the film that, remember when I did Sundance in January? This was probably the one film that I was the most, saddened that I wasn't able to see, because this was one of those films that, they only showed to people who were physically at the festival, and you couldn't watch it online, so, and then ever since, it was getting that level of praise, I just became so intrigued in this film. I wanted to see it immediately. The, trailer that came out just really hooked me in. It really seemed like something that was going to be something really special, and then having Jane Schoenbrunn attached to it. I mean, this is a director that, I really liked their last film, We're All Going to the World's Fair. I thought it was such an interesting look at, the dark side of the internet, and, especially the negative impact it can have on teenagers, and the predatory type stuff that they can run into. I just thought that film did just such a great job of presenting all of that, but also having a lot to say about the idea of individualism and kind of trying to find your place. And so I was just really excited to see what they were going to do here, and this film, I just honestly just really blew me away. There are so many things that I think are just so well handled here, but really I think the main thing to really talk about when it comes to this movie, what makes it as effective as it is really Jane Schoenbrunn's directing, because yes, their previous film, I think they really did show their capability as a director. They showed they have a style of their own, that they are trying to do something really different, but I also think that this film really asserts themselves as just one, I think personally, if this film is any indication, I think they are potentially on a trajectory to become one of the next great horror filmmakers. I mean, the way that they have this knack for horror, but have completely their own sort of style to it, is just something to really marvel at. And for this film in particular, this is a really personal film for them, because it's kind of this film that, it's about an amalgamation of different things, but really the main thing that they are trying to touch upon is the idea of gender dysphoria, and this, constant discomfort that, one feels as a result of that, how they feel like they're living this lie. They're not really really able to be authentically themselves. And I think Schönbrunn just does such a great job of conveying that feeling throughout this entire movie. You're feeling this, you feel almost sort of like closed up, and you feel like you aren't really able to experience, and you feel this like level of like crippling anxiety throughout this entire movie. And I think that they just do such a great job of really getting you to zero in on what our main character Owen is feeling at that particular point in his life, and how he's wrestling with all these different sort of emotions that he can't even fully comprehend, because he's not really reconciling with them. He's more so just kind of like repressing it, and you really do feel that throughout this entire film. And I think the way that they were able to do that here, it's just so well done. I think that their style, again, it's apparent throughout this movie what they're trying to communicate, and I think they do a really good job with that. And I'm just really impressed by their directing. I think that, like I said, they are really on track to become a director to truly watch out for, and I just really like what they are doing. Their eeriness and atmosphere especially, it's just so prevalent throughout this entire film. There wasn't a single second that this film did not have me on edge, that it didn't have me just locked in, and that I felt like I was, again, experiencing like someone's deepest thoughts kind of haunting them, and them not being able to fully comprehend them. I think that's something that Schönbrunn did such a great job with. But their screenplay as well is really well handled here, and this is probably the one area of the film that I do think has been a bit divisive, and I can kind of understand why, because yes, the movie's very disorienting. There are many moments throughout this film where you don't really know what's going on, you're really kind of confused, and I think that can come across as kind of alienating for some people. But for me, I just found myself that much more intrigued, and I think that there's a lot of things you can take away from this film. Yes, like I said, this is very much a trans story. I wouldn't even say it's a trans allegory. It is a trans story. Schönbrunn has said that this is the movie that kind of helped them step out of their comfort zone and start to realize things about themselves, and it was kind of the movie that helped them, kind of have that, like, trans awakening of sorts, and I think that, is really well communicated. But I also think this movie has a lot to say about just any part of yourself that you have ever repressed, something that you feel is wrong, like you are afraid to show this part of yourself to the world, and the impact that has on you. You keep trying to do what you think society wants you to do, what is going to be more acceptable, and as a result, you don't get to live life authentically as yourself. You feel like you are closed off, and that's kind of how Owen feels throughout this whole movie. He feels very disconnected from the world around him. He doesn't really have much he can relate to. He doesn't really have many friends. Hell, there's even a part of the movie where, where he's talking to Bridget Lundy Payne's character, and like mentions how he doesn't really know anything about love. He doesn't know what he identifies as. He just knows that he loves TV shows, because to him, that is the only thing that he is allowing himself to enjoy. That is the only thing that he's allowing himself to fully grasp in. And it's really the only time when I feel like Owen can truly be himself and escape into this world. And I think that's something that, again, was just so well handled when it comes to the story, but also your attachment to Owen as a character, I really did find myself latching onto. I think the other thing this film addresses very well is how we are able to escape through the idea of media. It's a really big part of this movie, the idea that, like, we can have so much shit going on in the world, but when we watch this piece of media, it really just helps us lock in, and it really helps us kind of cleanse ourselves, and it makes us feel a lot more at ease, and kind of like we aren't alone in that way. I think that's the other thing that Schönbrunn's really trying to touch upon here, and again, I think all those things are just really well communicated in this movie, and it makes such an effective film as a result. But the performances here also are just absolutely extraordinary. Justice Smith, look, this is an actor I have not been a big fan of, admittedly, up to this point. I have not said the greatest things about him. You can go back, watch my Jurassic World Fallen King review. I said that he's just like a terrible actor, and that I don't understand why he keeps gaining roles. And look, this is why now I don't do that anymore. If you notice, these days I don't say like this person's a terrible actor, because truly I don't know. Sometimes they can find that right role. Sometimes they can find a way to do something dramatically different that finally showcases their true abilities as an actor, and I feel like that's exactly what Smith is doing here. The way he channels this like childlike innocence of Owen, who really never does fully get to grow up. He always he starts off this movie, and I'm not gonna say like how far in time, how far we go with Owen in this film, but let's just say we do cover a significant chunk of time within his life, and there's a lot on his shoulders as a result. There's a lot that he really does need to pull off, and he does it effortlessly in this movie. I mean, I was just so blown away by his performance in this film. He displays a range that I truly did not know that he had within him. Again, especially because he's playing this character that is supposed to be so much younger, and yet I found it so believable. I found it so convincing in the way that he went about playing this character, and the way he, also explores, like, the deep pain and anguish that Owen is feeling throughout the entire movie. Again, I just really found myself latching onto it. I thought that he just did such a phenomenal job here, especially, though, the third act of this movie. Holy shit, there is one scene in particular that you truly are never gonna forget. I think whether you like this movie or not, that's gonna be one of the scenes that you remember, and it's because of Smith's performance that it is as effective as it is. I just think the way that, again, he's able to just really disappear into this character and play a different side of himself that we really haven't seen before, it really makes me feel like I have not given Smith the credit as an actor that he really does deserve, and it makes me hope that he latches on to more projects such as this one, because I really think it showcases his true abilities as an actor, and I was just really impressed by what he did here. Bridget Lundy Payne, though, also is fantastic in this film. I've seen them in a couple things. Like, I watched a couple episodes of Atypical, and they were pretty good in that, but I really loved their performance in this film as Maddie. Maddie is kind of the opposite of Owen, where she's someone who is a little bit more content with herself, but yet she's always kind of finding a way to disappear. She's very much into the idea of the Pinko Page. She knows what it brings out in her, and I think that she plays this character that is just very broken in that way, but yet she doesn't do it in a way that Owen does. She doesn't feel as closed off. She feels a little bit more part of the crowd, and that's because she is more in touch with who she's supposed to be. And there's this monologue of sorts that she gives in like the third act of this movie, and it really does a great job of just summing all of the themes up into a bow and kind of getting you an idea of like what this movie's really trying to go for. And I just thought, as a performer, Payne is just so great here. I really enjoyed their performance in this film. I think that the way they are able to get in touch with Maddie as a character and really get you to understand her and her struggles and what she's really going through, again, it's just really well handled. Especially the fact that a lot of it is not very like it's very subtle, the way they go about this character. I think just their performance was just so well handled in this movie, and the bond that these two form, it's a really interesting one to watch, because they kind of become these kindred spirits in a way where they are able to understand each other in a way that truly nobody else can, and you kind of see this bond that they form, but yet the only thing they're able to relate to is just this show they watch together. They don't really have a lot else in common beyond that. They're not even like the same age. And I just found that very fascinating, and I think that's something else that people are going to relate to, is that sometimes you just have that friend that, like, you don't necessarily see them as someone, you might not talk to them about, like, your deepest secrets, but yet you feel so much closer to them because of this shared love that you both have, and that's exactly the case when it comes to Owen and Maddie. The shared love they have for the Pinko Pig and the way it brings them together, it's just really endearing to watch, and you really do find yourself latching onto their friendship. So I thought that part of the movie worked really well, but I also really appreciated the way this film ended up telling its story, because it feels pretty straightforward at first, but as the film goes on, you start to kind of recognize more of what this film is really trying to get at. Why are these characters so drawn to this show? And I think the actual message to like take away from this film is one that really is going to resonate with a lot of people. I already talked about like the main themes they're trying to touch upon, but the way that they end up going about telling that story, I found to be just so engrossing and just so impressed by, because it was not at all the way I expected them to go go about it. There was one scene in particular involving Owen and him watching an episode of the show, and just the way they ended, and him watching an episode like that he hadn't seen before, and just the way they ended up going about that scene in particular, again, it adds this like darker feel, and it added this different layer to the film that I think just wasn't really there before, and I was very impressed by. And so again, I really was in for the ride the entire time, again, despite the fact that there's a lot of stuff that, yes, there definitely, you're going to be asking a lot of questions. I think for me, I appreciated just how open-ended so much of this film was. I liked how much this film is messing with your mind and taking you on this journey, because that's kind of what's happening to Owen in real time. The lines are getting blurred between reality and fiction, and you really do see how much that is messing with him throughout this entire film. And again, I really can't get into why that is or what they're really trying to get at, but I just think the way this film went about it was just absolutely incredible. The cinematography here also is just absolutely magnificent in this film, whether you're looking at the world of the Pink Opaque, which there is just so much to get lost into there. The obvious comparisons like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but there's other shows I'm sure that you will see that are reminiscent of what they're trying to go for, and I think they just do a great job of building this world, getting you to understand why anybody would be interested in this, but then also the way they showcase the real world, it always feels like there's just something that's a bit off, and I thought all of that was really well handled in this film, because again, as this movie goes on and we start to get more of an idea of what this movie is really trying to go for, the cinematography really becomes like one of the biggest standouts of this entire movie. It's one of those things that, again, it just really helps you stay locked into this film at all times. I found myself just so glued to what was going on. There's so many shots here that were just absolutely mesmerizing to look at, and I thought that the cinematography was just one of the best parts of this film. The score as well is really well done, but the soundtrack's definitely something we need to talk about, because what I like about this movie is that it feels very kind of Lynchian in the way that they use this music as a way to kind of tell the story, and I can't really get into how they do it, but frequently the film will cut away from these two actors, and instead it kind of turns into this performance of sorts, but it doesn't feel superfluous. It actually does have a purpose, because it kind of feels like it's doing it feels essential. It feels like we kind of need it here as a way to get us to understand more of what this film is trying to communicate, and not do it in a way that feels pandering, but just feels like a way that's enhancing what the film is trying to go for. So again, I think that's another really great aspect of this film. The editing as well, again, I love how just disorienting it is, and I love how, again, you feel this sense of just things slipping by and things just not making sense. The movie starts off and things feel relatively normal, but it gets more abstract as it goes along, to the point of insanity, and I just thought all of that was just so well handled in this film. Ultimately, I just really adored this film a lot. I think there's just so much to latch onto here. There's so many different themes you can connect to. You have two incredible performances from Justice Smith and Bridget Lundy Payne. I think those two alone are enough reason to love this, but also, again, just furthering my appreciation for Jane Schoenbrunn as a director. I think that they just really showcase the potential that they have, and really just how much the personal touch that they put into this movie, the different themes they're trying to get across, the way that they go about horror. Because look, I think on paper, a lot of people are going to say this isn't a horror movie, but I think when you really think about the scenario that this character is going through, it is absolutely terrifying to think about, and I think in that way it actually really does succeed as such. So I think if you're going into this film expecting a very straightforward movie that's gonna be reminiscent of other horror films you've seen, you're probably not gonna like this. This is very not studio friendly, and I understand why a lot of audiences have been turned off, but if you want something that truly is something very different and kind of takes you on this journey and has so much more to say, has so many deeper meanings to it, and so many different themes I think are just going to really touch a lot of people, with an ending that I think is generally one of my favorites of the entire year. It's the complete opposite of what you're expecting, but it's the perfect kind of ending that just gets you to really just have this huge, it really just gets you to understand the point that this film was always trying to make, and it leaves you with this sense of awe that I honestly was not expecting. I was pretty speechless by the time this movie ended, and I mean that in the best way possible. I've seen it twice now, and it's just one of those movies that I endlessly just want to dissect more and more, because even me talking about it, I don't feel like I'm doing it justice. I feel like there's just so much that this film does so incredibly well, and it really is just one of those you need to, see to really, that you really just need to kind of see for yourself to really understand the true impact of what this film is going for. I feel like it's a film that's been kind of underseen, and it's unfortunate because I really do think it is one of the most unique and special of its kind. It's certainly a film that really did get under my skin in the best way possible, and is one that I've just not been able to stop thinking about. It's by far one of my favorites of the entire year, and with all that said, I think it's pretty obvious to tell. I Saw the TV Glow absolutely gets an A+. Alright, so the next film we're talking about is Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, a movie that I was just so fucking excited for, because, look, even though, yes, Fury Road, I think, was just such a wonder of a film, and kind of feels like that, lights out sort of movie that, couldn't possibly be replicated, I was still really excited to see what this would bring to the table. I feel like Furiosa was just such a compelling character. There's just so much you can expand upon, and yeah, this film definitely proves that, because what I think that this film did so well is that, yes, it has similar techniques from the previous film, but this is a completely different movie entirely. And that's something that George Miller, in general, I think has done really well with the Mad Max movies. Whether you like them or not, there is no Mad Max film that is identical from the other. Each one is tackling a different kind of genre. Each one is diving into something that's just a little bit different from what we have seen before, and this film really is no different. I mean, if you really think about it, when I think we look at this film, we're looking at a movie that is far more grandiose. This is the definition of an epic. We are taking the world of the Wasteland and really just expanding upon it in a way we haven't seen before. We get a much better idea of the different factions. We kind of dive deeper into Immortan Joe and his family and how he kind of rises to power in the way that he does, but also getting just a much better exploration of Furiosa as a character. We really get a chance to understand her in this movie, the hope that she once possessed, how much was really taken away from her, how much shit she has really been put through. Yes, in Fury Road, there's that great scene where she goes back to once was her homeland, and it's completely ravaged and destroyed, and you kind of see, just how much this has broken her. But this film really gives you a chance to understand, why does that mean so much to her? What was it about that land that was so significant? And that's what this film does so incredibly well. I think prequels in general, the good ones, they're able to tie things in and get you to, explore these different nuances of these characters that just weren't there before, and it gives you a chance to rewatch the previous film and be like, oh, there's actually a little bit more meaning now to this. There's a little bit more of an understanding of what this character was really going through. And I think Furiosa just perfectly checks the boxes there. I mean, this film just does such a great job of fleshing out her character in a way that I didn't even think was fully possible, really getting you to understand just how she goes from being someone that has this hope, has a little bit more of a path for herself, and becomes this hardened badass set on destroying what was taken from her. I mean, I just think that they do such a great job of that, and Anya Taylor-Joy is so well cast in this movie. I think that she just does such a great job of representing this side of Furiosa, getting you to, yes, she channels what Charlize Theron did in that movie, but also what Charlize Theron did in that movie, but she also adds her own spin to it, and I think that she just does such a great job here. But Alia Brown also just really needs to be commended here because she is really, I think, given a harder performance here. This is not a performance where she talks a lot. In fact, a lot of the time, Furiosa is kind of being seen as like this prop of sorts that like everybody is trying to use to their own doing. Whether you have Dementis, who, you know, pretty much in his name, he is what he says he is. He is taking possession of Furiosa and he wants to kind of do his own thing with her. But then you have other characters who want to kind of use her to their own advantage, and I think that Brown just does such a great job of representing this humanity and this sympathy given to this character. I think that she just gives such a strong performance in this film, but again, also showing that strength that she has in her. Furiosa is very quick-witted, and she's someone that very much has a mind of her own, and I think just for, you know, Brown's performance alone really does showcase that, and I was just really impressed by what she did here, and I really just can't wait to see what else she ends up doing career-wise, because I think she has definitely a bright future ahead of her. But make no mistake, Chris Hemsworth is undeniably the star of this entire film, because as much as we do center on Furiosa, Dementis is essentially a co-lead here. We really get a chance of fleshing out this villain in a way that they really haven't done with any other villain in this franchise. Like, yes, Immortan Joe is very threatening. He's very scary. He's definitely someone that, like, you don't want to mess with, but I think it's more so just the physicality of that performance that really makes him memorable. It's not really what they're doing character-wise with him. You don't really know a ton about his backstory. Here, we get a much deeper sense of who Dementis is. Why is he doing all these terrible things? He has his own reasoning for doing it, and it gets you to really understand, but also really despise his character. And it's a really steep tightrope to walk, but Hemsworth just does it so effortlessly in this film. He just really transforms into this role. This guy is grimy and disgusting, but yet also has this very, like, charismatic type ability to him, and I think that he just does a really great job here, but he also is kind of pathetic. Like, as a villain, he is kind of a pathetic person, and I think that's something that Hemsworth just really understands. He brings this menace to this character, but also brings this level of sort of incompetence to him that gets you to really latch onto Dementis overall, and I just, you know, by far, I think when we look back at this movie, one of the most memorable things, honestly, is Dementis, and I'm just really happy that we now have a film that is this vehicle for Hemsworth to really just showcase a side of himself that we have not seen before. We have not gotten to see a performance where he's really able to kind of just let loose and play this character that is not likable by any stretch of the imagination, and I think that he is just so good in this film. Every time he's on screen, I found myself so drawn to what he was doing, and I think that he just gave a really fantastic performance here. Tom Burke also very good here. Can't really talk about the role that he plays, but he does play a pretty significant role here, and I thought that he honestly added a lot of heart to the film that I did not think was otherwise going to be there, but I think that he just does a phenomenal job in this movie. Again, George Miller's directing, I just really like the fact that he commits to this film being this epic of sorts, and as a result, because we are diving so much further into all these different parts of the wasteland, there isn't as much action in this movie. And that's to say that when it is there, I think it's that much more effective as a result, because it kind of is the antithesis of Fury Road. Fury Road, when you watch it back, really is this, like, one long chase sequence. Yes, there are, like, moments in the, you know, moments to, like, you know, temporarily, like, halt things, but it always feels like we're, like, this is a pit stop, or, like, stopping for gas, and then we're gonna, you know, the gas never really stops. Like, we're still on the gas the entire time, and we're just kind of moving. This film really is a lot more slower paced and really does take its time, but yet you never feel the length because you're so locked into what's going on. And it makes those action sequences that when we get to it feel that much more memorable. There's this tanker chase especially that is absolutely riveting in this film, and I think is one of the biggest one of the best set pieces in this film for sure. I absolutely loved the action sequences in this movie when they were there. I think that they were very effective, but the film also does a great job, again, of being this, you know, story for Furiosa, and the way that they wrap everything back around to how she's going to end up where she does at the end of Fury Road is generally just phenomenal storytelling here. It feels like from the beginning this was always meant to be a piece of the puzzle. Like, Miller always meant for this to be a film. And that's, again, what great prequels can really do. The ones that feel seamless. The ones that always feel like they were meant to be here from the beginning. And I think this film just does that to a T here. The score, once again, Junkie XL just always kills it. Tom Holkenborg, phenomenal composer, and really just kills it in this movie. Again, adding that sort of epic feel and just doing a great job with that. The editing to this film, I think, is also just really well done. A lot of scenes go on longer than you expect them to, but it doesn't feel like they're dragging out. It is more so I think the momentum, the way they're able to build to it is just really well done here. The opening, like, 10, 15 minutes especially, just really had me on edge. I had no idea how exactly it was going to go down, because you know what's going to happen, obviously, but it's more so just the journey in getting there and seeing how all these things play out. It makes it that much more effective, but also that much more devastating, and I think this film just does an amazing job with that. Ultimately, Furiosa, I think, is just the perfect definition of what a great prequel should do. It takes what works in the other films, but finds a way to put its own spin onto it. You got some phenomenal performances here. George Miller, just once again at the top of his game, has not missed a step in any regard. Really just feels like this is yet another, really just feels like this was another film that he wanted to make. In no way does this feel like a studio movie that they had to make because Fury Road was such a success, which actually, in retrospect, Fury Road was not a huge box office success, so it makes the fact we got this film that much more of a miracle. Unfortunately, I don't know if we're going to get another one, but if we somehow miraculously do, I am very much on board to see just whatever Miller has cooking up, because I just feel like he knows what to do in this franchise. He has so many interesting ideas, and just going off of this film, I think there's so much more to draw from. The only issues I really do have with it is that because we are covering so much, there are some aspects that don't feel as well fleshed out. Like in Morton Joe, for example, his whole backstory, it doesn't feel like we get enough in this movie. We get a little bit more of an idea of what he's really been, doing this entire time, but still there are some things that I wish the film just dived a bit deeper into, and there are definitely like chunks of time that I wish we could have seen spent more in this movie, but really other than that, I mean, this was just, again, so much better than I even expected it to be. I think it just does what a fantastic, again, it feels like a necessary part of the franchise, and really, again, it just ends up being a film that I think is going to really win you over. In fact, I think even if you didn't like Fury Road, I can see you enjoying this movie because it is just that distinctive. It is trying to do something a lot different from what the other entries have done, and as a result, it is very successful at that. So overall, I was just really blown away by Furiosa, and I am going to give it an A. Alright, so the next one is Hitman, and this is one I've been looking forward to for a long time now, ever since, I believe it was TIFF last year, where people were raving about it. Right off the bat, really sucks that this didn't get a wide release. I know, like, Canada and, like, other places, like, got it in theaters, but here it was dropped onto Netflix and kind of forgotten as a result, which really sucks, because one, it's a damn good movie. Two, there is no doubt in my mind that, like, especially just based on star appeal alone, star power alone, this would have been a huge success, I think, and would have been like one of those like smaller films that people just get like really excited to watch. So it really is unfortunate that it did not get that proper release, but regardless, it's still a damn good film. Right, I think the thing that works right off the bat is just how great and I think there's a lot of things that work really well about it, but I mean, one of the major standouts right off the bat is the cast here. Glenn Powell, this is an actor that I have been a fan of for a while now. I mean, all the way back at, like, Scream Queens, that's, like, the first thing I really saw him in, where I'm like, this guy is gonna be something special. He's stealing every single scene. He's so charismatic. He, like, chews up all the scenery. Like, I've known this guy was going to be, like, this huge star, and I'm just really happy to see that he's finally starting to get that notoriety, because this film really does prove just why he deserves it. I mean, there's so much he has to do in this movie. On one hand, he's playing this guy that's kind of like mild-mannered, that doesn't really stand up for himself. He kind of just lets people walk all over him, and, I think as a character, you really do find yourself latching onto Gary because you really want to see him succeed, and seeing him become this hitman of sorts and him starting to gain this sense of confidence. It's definitely one of the best parts of the movie, and I think Powell just does a really great job at channeling that, but also having to play so many different personalities, all these different facets of hitman that he has to play, and the way he pulls it off with such ease and bringing something table to all of them. He really proves his versatility as an actor here, and this is why I really do think moving forward he's going to be one of the next like big stars in Hollywood, because he proves in this movie he's not just a one-trick pony. Yes, a lot of the time he's playing these like kind of like very suave, charismatic characters, but here he's kind of playing against type. Like I said, he's playing someone that's a little bit more reserved, but then starts to become a little bit more volatile as the movie goes on, and I think he just does such a great job of that. His knack for comedic timing is also just so great, and again, he's just one of those actors that you really find yourself latching onto. But as good as he is, Adria Arjona, honestly, might be even better than him in this movie. I think her performance is fantastic here. The character that she plays of Madison, I think, is really well done in this movie, because unlike Gary, she's someone that you're really kind of, unsure about. You see that these two are, forming this love for each other, and you really do latch onto them as a result, but at the same time, you want to know more about Madison's past. What is she really, what is this really all about for her? She's, constantly talking about her husband and how, like, abusive he is, and how she wants Gary to, like, try to kill him, and what's really going to happen there, and what's her whole angle. And I think that she is just so great in this role. She's someone else who you just latch onto immediately. She just has that, again, she just has that range that you really just find yourself latching onto, but she also has that very, like, alluring sort of presence that you really can't look away from, and the chemistry between these two is nothing short of some of the best I have seen in any movie in 2024. I think the two of them just work so well together. So you got some great performances, and those, that works really well, but it's the directing from Richard Linklater that really is such a standout here, because look, I've been a fan of Linklater, but to say he hasn't really been hitting the same lately, I think would be a pretty big understatement. There's been a lot of movies he's been doing that just really has not been the greatest. I think honestly since Boyhood he's kind of just been not necessarily flatlining, but just not delivering on the same level that he once was. He's not operating on that same level, and this to me really is his first project in a while that feels like, he's got his footing back, and he really knew what he wanted to do here, and I feel like he really challenges himself with this movie, because yes, this film has those sort of, quirky moments that we tend to associate with Linklater, but it also is very action-based at points, and there's a section of this movie that gets a little darker, and, I think he handles all of that stuff really well, and, the thing I really like about this movie is that you can't really categorize it as one thing. It's kind of an amalgamation of different things. On one hand, it is this, like, coming-of-age film where, you're seeing this guy, and he's kind of, transforming into somebody else, and he's learning things, and he's really, like, evolving and changing as a person, and I think he does a good job with that. It's also kind of a biopic, because, believe it or not, I don't know how either, but this is based on a true story, and I think it actually, seems like it pays tribute to that fairly well. So, I really did enjoy that aspect of it. It also can be a romance movie, with us kind of seeing this budding romance between Gary and Madison, and how the two of them form this really tight bond, but how that kind of complicates things for Gary, because he's meant to just be, her fixer and not really form any sort of attachment, and how that kind of overcomplicates things. And then it's this action film, and it also is really funny. So it really is a bunch of different things, and the thing I think that's most surprising, that it all really does work. It doesn't feel like a mess by any stretch of the imagination. It all just kind of blends together really well, and I think that Linklater did a really good job when it comes to directing this movie. But the writing also, I think, is just really well done here. The central story is one that I just found myself so compelled to. The idea that Gary, becomes this hitman, and he, works for all these different people, and then there's this one girl who he just starts to form an attachment to, and he has to try to hide it from all the other people he's working for, while simultaneously also try to pull off the mission. I just think is such an interesting story. There's a lot of places you can go with it, and the way it all went down also, I found to be rather unpredictable. It did not at all go in the direction that I was hoping, that I thought it was going, and honestly, I was really impressed by just how much they kind of threw me for a loop here. I really did find myself just so zeroed into this film. Another character to definitely talk about here is the character of Jasper, who I can't really get into him too much, but he really overcomplicates things in a very interesting way. He's kind of on Gary's tail this entire movie, and you kind of see this back and forth between them, and how that all culminates. Holy shit, I was not prepared for the direction that ended up going. In fact, the third act of this movie is generally like one of the most heart-stopping and unpredictable that I think I have seen all year. It's one of those endings where, like, even if you think you know how the movie is going to end, you really don't. And I think the film really does save its best moments for that ending, and I really just loved the way they ended up going about all of that. Definitely, you know, I've seen some people kind of come down on the ending, but I did not think that the end, you know, kind of feel like the ending was too mean-spirited, or that the ending was kind of, you know, trying to say one thing or the other, but I did not take that from this film at all. I think that this is really a film about, like, embracing your identity and trying to, you know, find your true self, and, you know, trying to step outside of your comfort zone. I think that really is what this film is all about, and I think it really does a great job at telling that story. So a lot to really love here. The cinematography also really well done. The score, everything is really good about this movie. I think the only things that bring it down for me is that there are a couple aspects of Gary's life that I just would have liked to see explored a bit more, particularly him as a school teacher. We kind of see that he doesn't really get a lot of respect from his students, but it feels pretty surface level overall, and by a certain point in the movie, I kind of forgot that's something that he was doing, because they don't really focus on it all that much, so I wish they would have given a bit more focus to that side of things. There's also another character who is Gary's ex-girlfriend, who we just don't really get to see enough of here, and there's a really good scene between the two of them where she's kind of giving him advice as to, like, how to navigate everything, but, like, aside from that, we just don't really get enough of the back and forth between those two, and it's not like she's, like, a really important character, but I did feel there was more they could have potentially done with her to kind of dive deeper into Gary's past, how things went wrong, kind of, you know, show more layers of, you know, give us a few more layers of him, that I think would have maybe benefited the film. But overall, I mean, I just had such a great time with this movie. I think if you're looking for a film that has two really great leads, some really funny moments, a really compelling story that surprisingly, like I said, is a true story for the most part. I don't know, like I said, how much of it is true and how much isn't, but it definitely, you know, the way it plays out, you could not have told me that this was a true story if I didn't look it up. Like, it definitely is one of those kind of films. Some fantastic cinematography, some superb direction from Richard Linklater, who really does feel like he is back on his A-game in this film, and really just has me excited to see what he's going to do moving forward. I know he has another film with Glenn Powell coming up very soon, so I really hope that one ends up succeeding, and hopefully is able to acquire a much bigger release than this one can, because while I do think this is a film that people talked about, I have no doubt that if it went to theaters, it probably would have been making an even bigger splash than it ultimately did, but it really doesn't take away from just how much enjoyment I got out of Hitman, so I'm going to give it overall an A-. Alright, so the next one we're talking about here is Inside Out 2, and this is one that, like, I was really excited to get to do a full video for, but obviously not going to get to do that. Look, this was one of my most anticipated films, not just of the summer, but, like, of the entire year. I think Pixar definitely has not been on the highest streak lately. They have not really been hitting the same highs that they once did. Every so often, they've had a really good film. Like, I really loved Turning Red. I was a big fan of Soul. Luca's pretty good, but, like, aside from that, not really been all that great. I did enjoy Elemental last year, so there's that, but, like, aside from that, really not all that great. But this really, I think, is the film that, like, reminds us that, like, Pixar really does still have it. Like, when they put their mind to it, Pixar really does have it in them, and I think this is easily one of their better films they've put out to date, because, look, right off the bat, I think making a sequel to Inside Out on paper definitely seems like it could have come across as, like, very redundant. It's like we've already done this before, but I think this film really does do enough to really justify its existence. Aging Riley up to be a teenager and now having her deal with like far more complex emotions really just opens up to telling a much more complex story than what we got in the first one. Like, yes, on the surface, things are relatively simplistic. We're mainly dealing with Riley's anxiety and how that is really overtaking everything else. But the film also has a lot to say about the idea of growing up and kind of forgetting about, your childhood self and trying to, get back in touch with that. I think the movie does a really good job when it comes to that. Joy, especially as a character, goes through a really interesting arc in this movie because she's always been the one that can kind of help Riley through these situations, but she's kind of being disregarded because Riley is so squarely focused on her anxiety, and because that is the main thing that she's feeling, Joy is just not able to help her out. And so you kind of see her struggling now, where she's kind of trying to figure out, how to really go about this. And I thought it was a really interesting role for her to have. And, look, Amy Poehler is still like her fun self in this movie, but I like that we get to see a Joy that is a little bit more unsure of what to do. And I think this movie does a really good job with that. Also giving a lot more to the other emotions in this film, like anger and disgust and fear, have a lot more to do in this movie than we've seen in the first one. Anger especially, I think honestly might be my favorite. I really loved him in the first one, but here especially, I think I can really say he is my favorite. He goes down such a surprising arc in this film. We actually get to see a few more layers of anger than I was really expecting, and I absolutely loved it. There's this great running gag with him involving this show, and that's all I'm gonna say. It's very reminiscent of like Barney, and oh my god, every time they came back to that, I was in absolute stitches. There's this really great running gag with Disgust and this anime character, and I loved what they ended up doing there. Fear is also just a lot of fun here, has a lot of really great moments, and so I like that they found a way to divide the teams so we have some different interactions here. The first film, it was mainly joy and sadness, and the others were kind of just in the control room doing their thing. But here, it's kind of different, and I like that they got to do that here. I think that, the voice cast all still works really well in terms of the old emotions, but the new emotions are really the ones to talk about here, because I think a lot of them just really stick out. Anxiety, I think, walks away as generally one of the best Pixar villains out there, just because of how big of a presence that she really is, but also how incredible Maya Hawke is as this character. She pours her heart and soul into playing Anxiety, someone who, in her mind, is really trying to do the right thing, but just keeps messing everything up. She's trying to, help out Riley, but because it's Anxiety, it's not going the way that she wants it to, and you can see how she's kind of wanting to be in control of everything, and the way that she went about that, playing this, like, incredibly just hyper active character who is always just conjuring up the craziest scenarios. I thought she just did such a great job with that. But also the way Anxiety is portrayed in this movie is deeply relatable. There is one scene in particular involving Anxiety and this thing that Riley keeps saying to herself, and it's like, yup, exactly, that's how I feel all the time. And I feel like anyone who has ever had some kind of like crippling anxiety that you just can't seem to get rid of will very much relate to this movie, and I thought they did a really good job with that. I think for younger kids especially, like, this is a really good way to introduce them to the idea of anxiety, show them that it's a normal thing that everybody goes through. I think this movie does a really good job of diving into that, and so Anxiety, I think, works as just a really strong character in this movie and never feels one-dimensional. I was really worried that they were going to put Anxiety, that they were going to make Anxiety this very one-dimensional villain that didn't really have much to her, but thankfully I think they do just enough to get you to actually really understand and almost sympathize with her by the end of this movie, and so I really like what they did with her. And like I said, Maya Hawke is fantastic, and it even manages to do something a bit different with Anxiety that I wasn't really expecting them to do. I thought Anxiety was going to be mainly, like I said, this very over-the-top, hyperactive character that could have gotten very annoying, but they actually gave her her a bit more nuance and a bit more complexity and humanity than I was really expecting them to. There's one scene especially involving this script of sorts, and just the way that they went about all of that I thought was just so well handled. And again, it just really felt like they took their time to think about what anxiety can do. How far can we take this concept? It really feels like they knew what they were doing here, and I was very impressed by the way they handled everything that happened with this character. The other emotions I definitely really did enjoy. I think Envy's a lot of fun to watch here. Io Adebari is just so fun as that character. Ennui is one of the funniest characters in the entire movie. Just has this very blasé attitude about everything, and it's so fun to watch, just seeing how uncaring Ennui is to pretty much everything. Ennui is to pretty much everything. I thought, definitely one of the funniest characters in this movie. And then there's Embarrassment, who, look, Paul Walter Hauser doesn't have a ton to do here, but when he's here, it is very fun to watch. There's this really great running gag that happens whenever he is, very embarrassed, and what ends up happening there I thought was just a lot of fun to watch. So there's a lot of things this movie does do very well. And then when it comes to Riley, actually has a bit more to do in this movie. The first one, yes, we cut back to her often, but here she really does function as a co-lead of sorts. I feel like we spend just as much time with her as we do with the emotions, and the story that she's going through this time around, I think, is one that a lot of people are going to relate to. She's has this group of friends, and she is unsure if she's going to be able to, she is having kind of a hard time feeling like they are going to be moving away, and she doesn't really know how to process that. And then there's this new group of friends she's trying to impress, and she's kind of having this identity crisis of sorts and kind of doing things that she normally wouldn't do. And I found that side of Riley to be maybe even more compelling than the first movie. She often does things that are against her own best interests, but because her anxiety is telling her to do it, she feels like it's the only possible path taken. Again, as someone with anxiety, I feel like that's very relatable. How often, you don't do the thing that makes sense, you do the thing that absolutely doesn't make sense, but it's the thing that in that moment your inner voice is telling you to do. And I feel like that worked really well with Riley in this movie. I really enjoyed what they did with her. So there's just a lot of things that work really well here. It's very funny. I think the animation is maybe even better this time around. The different places that they end up going to. Also, different animation styles they play around with here. Not to spoil anything, but they actually do tackle a few different styles of animation. It was really cool. It was really impressive the way they were able to just blend everything. Look, I shouldn't be surprised because it's Pixar, but just the way they were able to seamlessly blend everything together, I thought was just really well handled. It's also very funny. I think it honestly might even be funnier than the first movie. I was laughing quite hard many times throughout this movie, and I thought there were just a lot of moments that worked really well here for me. Like I said, I think that the emotion and the level of complexity really has not gone away in this film at all. I think there's still this very deep and relatable message that a lot of people are going to latch onto. I honestly did find myself tearing up quite a few times. There was one moment with joy, especially in the third act, and every time I think about it, I start to get a little misty-eyed. I'm not going to lie. It definitely does somewhat get to me, and I thought that was a pretty effective moment. So it really does kind of feel like this big throwback movie for Pixar, and really does feel like this is kind of getting back to what they used to do best. I think the only thing that brings it down for me and makes it not as good as the first one is that most of the interactions with these characters work really well, but some of the new emotions I just didn't feel got enough to do, particularly Embarrassment. As much as I enjoy Paul Walter Hauser, there's a dynamic of sorts that he forms with Sadness, and I thought it was really sweet, and I liked where they were going, but then they just didn't really do much of anything with it. We got like a couple scenes here and there, and I just feel like they could have dived deeper into that dynamic. It would have been something really different for Sadness. It would have actually given her a bit more to do, because it does kind of feel like for a while while, they don't really know what to do with her character, and I feel like having embarrassment in there and having these two form this friendship of sorts, I think could have made it that much stronger as a result. But it really doesn't take away at the end of the day that I do think that this is absolutely one of the best sequels that Pixar has ever done. And I think similar to like a Toy Story, if you want to pick this back up every few years or so, I would definitely be down for it. Like, I think, you know, you want to pick this up when like Riley's an adult and has like kids of her own. I think there's so much you can do with that. I think this film really shows that like there are a ton of possibilities for what they could do moving forward when it comes to this world, when it comes to this idea. I feel like they've barely scratched the surface of it. Like, even 2 films in, I think there's still so much more they can do, and I'm happy that they're gonna get the chance to do it. This film was a big success. Inside Out 3 is probably going to be imminent. I don't remember if it was announced or not yet, but if it was, I definitely am gonna be excited to see it when it happens, because I just feel like there's a lot more they can do here moving forward, and I do feel like this could potentially become one of the stronger Pixar franchises that they've had. Like, this could be on the level of an Incredibles. This could be on the level of a Toy Story. And it maybe already is. Like, I think it could definitely get there for sure. And I think that Inside Out 2 just proves that as long as you have a good story and a direction of what you want to do, everything else just kind of works out. And that really is the best way to describe this movie. I think for the first time in a while, it felt like they had a genuine direction and really wanted to, you know, really had this idea, and they pushed it forward in a way that just felt so magical. And it just felt like what Pixar used to do best. And I think this film is just such a great example of that. So overall, I just really love this one a lot. And to be honest, like, look, there's been a lot of movies that I've enjoyed this year, but this film, something I noticed while watching it is just how much fun I was having. I had this big old smile on my face. I was laughing constantly. I was so I was so just, elated watching this movie and just having a grand old time. And that's not something I've been able to say for a lot of movies this year. There's a lot of films where I've wanted to feel the way, and it just hasn't really happened. Not necessarily the movie's fault, but also just, things I've been feeling, wasn't in the right mood. Like, I enjoyed it, but it wasn't able to elicit that reaction in me. And when a film is able to do that at this point, that's really when you know you succeeded. And I feel like that alone is why Inside Out 2 was as much of a win as it really was. So I was a really big fan of this one. A for Inside Out 2. Definitely feels like the big comeback for Pixar that we've all really been hoping for. Okay, so the next one, Kinds of Kindness, is honestly a really weird one to talk about, I feel like, in this bunch, just because of the fact that, like, the majority of these films I'm talking about, they are, single narrative focused, and, there's the regular things I can talk about, the acting, the writing, the directing, all that stuff. This is very much an anthology film, and so it's kind of hard to talk about it just in this brief section, but I'm gonna try to do the best I can here, and I think really the only way to go about it is to really just summarize this entire thing, because yes, we do have 3 shorts here, but what I enjoy about this film right off the bat is that, unlike a majority of anthology films where I feel like they usually pack too many shorts in at once, like they do 5 but they really should only do 3, this one wisely recognizes that let's just try to expand upon these as much as we can to where they almost feel less like short films and feel more like longer TV episodes. And that's not to say that this feels like a TV show. Like, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying in terms of length, I think they do a much better job, and they get a lot more mileage out of all 3 of these stories as a result. And I think that's something that I was very impressed by. But what I also really love about this film is how they really do connect all 3 of them together. I'll briefly state what each film is about. The first one, we're focusing on this guy, and pretty much his entire life has been controlled by his boss, down to the wire of, like, when he wakes up, when he sleeps, when he has sex with his wife. Pretty much everything is controlled by him, and suddenly one day he ends up losing his job after failing to, perform a task for him, and you kind of see the internal struggle that he ends up having as a result. The second one is very different from the other 3. It is much more of this like dark horror film of sorts, where we're focusing on this guy and his wife has been missing at sea for years. Suddenly she is now returned, but he's pretty convinced that there's just something off about her and that she might not possibly be his wife just based on mannerisms and things like that. And the third one is rapidly different from the other two because it is significantly longer and honestly feels like it could be its own film, where we're focusing on Emma Stone's character. She is a part of this cult that is, all I can say, like, has a obsession with water. I can't really say too much more than that. But basically, she is trying to do what she can to deliver them this person who she thinks is going to be their savior. And that's really all I can say for the three of these. But all three of them are really well done. And the thing I like about all three is that they each have their own sort of theme. It all coalesces together, I think, into this idea of, one, yes, this film is very heavily diving into the idea of cults and just how dangerous they are and what it can do to a person. Yes, I think that's a big part of this movie, but I think the other part of this film is really the idea about appeasement, how we constantly feel this need to... But I really do think the entire film, if you really want my honest opinion, it's all about control. I mean, each one of these stories, we are following a character who is either longing for control or being controlled or feeling like they are in control of themselves, and I think all of it really does fit together very well as a result, and most of them do focus on somebody who is, performing a task for somebody that by no means they should want to, gain the respect of. They don't treat them right, they are constantly being manipulated into doing these terrible things, and we see that happen throughout the entirety of this film. And what I think that Yorgos Lanthimos does a fantastic job with is, again, the way he's able to connect all three of these stories together. It does feel like there is a similarity between the three of them, although all of them are distinctly different. I think he does do a really good job when it comes to blending all that together. I think that honestly is probably the hardest thing to do when it comes to an anthology film, especially when you have so many different stories going on. But again, I think Lanthimos wisely recognized what he needed to keep in and what he didn't, and I think he did a really good job with that. But I also just really appreciated all three of these stories. I think the first one in particular is easily the best of the three. It is easily the most interesting. There's a really great reveal as to what's really going on with Jesse Plemons' character and why he is doing what he's doing, and just how far just how far of a stranglehold his boss really has on him. You really do see that in this one, and I think it is particularly just really strong. It's also very funny, easily out of the three, it is the funniest. I was laughing pretty consistently throughout, and I just think the first one is really well done. The second one is way more of this, like I said, much more of this horror type short. It's a lot darker, there's a lot less jokes, and it definitely is very interesting to watch, kind of seeing this story of Emma Stone and her just slight mannerisms and how this is sort of irritating Jesse Plemons' character and what he's really doing. I think that all is really well done. And then the third one, honestly, like I said, feels like it could be its own movie, and in some ways kind of feels like maybe it was supposed to be, because it's the one they spend the most time on. The other two are 45 and 35-ish minutes, but this last one takes up at least an hour and a half of the movie, and the movie's 2 hours and 45 minutes, so they spend a considerable chunk of time on this last one, and it makes sense considering that it is definitely a lot grander than the other stories, but on a first watch, it is pretty jarring just how much time they spend on this one. I do think I definitely really did appreciate it. I didn't really like it as much the first go around, but the second time I watched it, I really gained more of an appreciation for it, and I thought that it told a really interesting story. There's one moment that I don't know if it was the most necessary. I don't love the direction that they end up going with it, but I get that they had to do it to get this character to a certain point. I just don't know if I loved the way all that was handled. But again, what I will say about this film is that I think all three of them are very interesting, and I think Yorgos just does a really great job of finding a central focus, but also making sure that he dives fully into that very, just all those, like that idiosyncratic nature that we expect to see from him. Everything feels very just kind of offbeat and weird, and you have this feeling of uneasiness throughout the entire movie, and I think that's something that is like a staple of who Lanthimos really is, but also in some ways feels like a throwback. He's done these previous two films, and while yes, they were definitely weird and off-putting, they had this sense of comedy to them, and this film doesn't necessarily have that. Yes, like I said, there are funny moments, but it is much more in line with something like Killing of a Sacred Deer or The Lobster than The Favorite or Poor Things. And again, I think it just really shows like his versatility. Yes, he has a style of his own, but he has different ways to go about it, and this film really does prove that, especially like I said, because each one really is kind of its own genre in that way, which I really did appreciate. The first one, like I said, being this sort of character study of sorts, and the second one being way more of this like dark thriller, and then the third one I would say is much more of this sort of character drama, but also this adventure of sorts, and I think all three of them are very effective as they are, and then the performances also are fantastic in this movie. I think everyone does a really strong job here, but easily I think the clear standout is just I think everyone really does rise to the occasion. Emma Stone's doing her usual thing, Margaret Qualley's really great here, but I think the absolute standout for me, if I really had to pinpoint one, has to be Jesse Plemons, who, look, he is just such a force of nature as an actor. I talked about Civil War earlier this year. The guy had like 5 minutes of screen time in that movie, and the fact that you walk away from that film and he is one of the things that you think about, again, it just really speaks to how incredible of an actor he is, and this film in particular, I think, is probably one of his most impressive to date, because all three of these characters he's playing could not be more different than the last, and that's the case with a lot of the actors in this movie, but Plemons, I think, has the toughest challenge because they are the most distinctive. The first film, he's playing this guy who's kind of reclusive. He's very to himself, and as a result, he's playing this guy who just doesn't seem to have a lot of agency. He's very shy, he's very awkward, and I think he does a really good job at playing that, but you also see this, like, obsession that he has when it comes to his relationship with William Dafoe, like, his relationship with his boss, played by William Dafoe. I think all of that's really well done, but then the second one, he's playing this guy that is, like, far more straight-laced, far more, like dark and kind of cruel, and you don't necessarily enjoy watching him. And then the third one, he's playing the complete opposite. He's kind of playing this, he's playing someone who's a little bit more of on the lighter side of things. He's way more of this like comedic relief, and he isn't really involved with all the weird shit going on. He's probably one of the more normal characters in the third, in the third section of this film. So again, it's really impressive how much he is able to channel all these different emotions, all these different personalities, and make each one feel so distinctive. You never feel like you're watching Jesse Plemons. You feel like you're watching him portray all these different characters, and it's just really impressive how well he was able to pull it off, and it really just reminds you how just incredible of an actor he is. I mean, he is so good at playing characters, and this film really does show that he really is just willing to do pretty much anything, and I think as long as he is in a film, you can guarantee he's going to give an incredible performance, and this film really does remind you of that. So again, there's a lot that works really well here. The cinematography I really did enjoy. There's some really interesting things they do with it. Sometimes the film goes black and white, and I didn't really understand the purpose of it at points, but then on a second watch, because I saw this movie twice, and I started to get a bit more of an idea of what they were really trying to go for. The score, I'm telling you, is easily going to be one of the most divisive things about this movie. If it isn't already, I am shocked that it really hasn't been, because the score literally is like the same like 3 notes on an off-key piano. Remember like Erskine Fendrick's score for Poor Things, how it starts off kind of like eerie and unsettling, and like the music doesn't feel like it's even like in sync. Everything feels kind of offbeat and off key, and then it morphs into something way more orchestral by the end, way more succinct, and by the end becomes almost orchestral. That's not the case with this. This is literally that off key feeling the entire movie. It's the only score that ends up playing, and I think it's very effective when it's used, because it also is used to a comedic level. There's times where they will play the piano and they use it to kind of emphasize the shock of the scene, and I thought it actually worked really well. It was probably one of the most effective uses of a score that I have seen in any movie this year. I just really like the way they had it looming throughout the entire movie, but also knew when to use it. They use it pretty sparingly. You do hear it admittedly quite a bit, but it's not to the point where the score feels like it is overtaking the movie. They use it at just the right points, and as a result, I think it's very effective. So I think that works really well. The editing in the movie is, like I said, 2 hours and 45 minutes, and to be honest, I didn't really feel it the first time I watched it. I wasn't crazy about the third short, but about the third act of this movie. But I think rewatching it, it definitely does have a pretty strong story. I think there's a lot of things that they do really well with it. I like where they take Emma Stone's character. I like what they're trying to say about this idea of this cult and what this really means for her and sort of the journey she ends up going on. Like I said, there's like one thing that I'm kind of iffy about where they end up going with her. But other than that, I mean, I think that it's pretty effective what they end up doing. So there's a lot to really love about this film. I think the only thing that really does bring it down for me, and there's a couple things here and there that don't really work. One of them is that as much as I do love this cast, and like I said, I think everyone is really well utilized here. Jesse Plemons being the standout, but like Emma Stone and Willem Dafoe and Margaret Qualley and Mamadou Athie, Joe Alwyn, everyone does a really great job here. The only issue I would say is that while I think some of these actors are kind of underused in one of the shorts, they at least find a way to have them be a bit more prominent. Like Mamadou Athie doesn't have a lot to do in the first and the third, but he has a lot to do in the second. Joe Alwyn does not have much of anything to do in the first, but the third one especially really does, but the second and third really do end up making up for that. Margaret Qualley and Willem Dafoe has a pretty small role in the second, but the first and the third, he's like a very prominent character. And then Margaret Qualley is, pretty prevalent throughout all three of these. Really, when I'm looking at this cast, the only person that doesn't really have much of anything to do, unfortunately, ends up being Han Chow, who, as much as she tries, I just feel like isn't really given that much to work with. She does have a little bit in the first one, but the third and the second especially, there's really not much given for her to do. I do think there is an interesting storyline of sorts with her in the second part of this film. What they ended up doing I thought was kind of interesting. But it just wasn't dived into deep enough, and I feel like this was the time for her to kind of have her moment, to kind of have her be a bit, to stand out a bit more in this movie, and they just didn't really take advantage of that. So I feel like if I had to think about the one actor that I feel like was kind of just not given the chance to really show her chops, I really do think it was Chow here. I just don't think there's a lot for her to do throughout this movie, and I was pretty underwhelmed by what they ended up giving her. And then the only other issue I would say is that while I enjoy all three of these films, and like I said, the first time I wasn't crazy about the third one, I think I can definitively say on a second watch, as much as I enjoy all three, I think the second is easily the weakest, and it's not because of the story. I actually really like a lot of the things they do story-wise. My issue is that out of the three, to me, the second is easily the most rushed. I just feel like there's a lot of things they introduce in this one that just don't really get a satisfying conclusion. There's a subplot in particular that I just mentioned with Han Chow, and it really doesn't go anywhere. Like, I wanted to see more of what they were trying to do with that. I thought that there were some really interesting ideas they could have dived deeper into, kind of showing how she's affected by what's going on, but they really didn't do that, and so I was pretty underwhelmed. There's a couple other things involving Willem Dafoe that I wish we got a bit more moments with. And so I think out of the three, I can definitively say this, I think I can fairly say the second is probably my least favorite. But overall, I mean, I like this quite a bit. I think this is another hit from Yorgos Lanthimos, really just proving why he's one of the most audacious and impressive directors out there. I think he finds a way to take an idea of an anthology film and really put his own spin on it, whether it's the ways he has this theme looming throughout all of them, the way he connects them together as well. It's not what you expect, and I thought it was really cool the way he did. They all involved this character RMF, and the way that they incorporate him I thought was really cool as well. Get a really talented cast, a really solid screenplay, some generally very funny moments, a very unique score, to say the least, that I don't think we're going to be forgetting anytime soon. Again, I think this is just another great example of what he really does do best, and like I said before, things, as long as he continues to put out films, I mean, I will be there day one. I cannot wait for Bugonia and just seeing what else he has up his sleeve, because I think he is just such a absolute talent. Truly, I think one of the best working today, and this film, I think, is yet another great example of why. So A- for Kinds of Kindness. I honestly liked it more than I was expecting to. I went in with admittedly pretty high expectations, but just because it was an anthology film, like, it really could have gone either way for me, and so I'm really happy to say I enjoyed this one as much as I did. Okay, so what's funny is that this next movie I'm talking about, I Used to Be Funny, is actually one of the reasons this video took so long to come out. I was planning to watch this a while ago, and, you know, I had a rental of it, and I just was never... I never was able to get around to watching it. There were just other things, and it was just getting in the way, and you know how it goes. So I finally went ahead and watched it, and yeah, I mean, I think this film has been criminally overlooked. I mean, right off the bat, the main draw here, the thing that really got me excited, was, of course, Rachel Sennett. I mean, I think that she is on her way to becoming, like, one of the, like, big stars in Hollywood, and this film makes a pretty good case as to why that is, despite it not even being a American film, no less. This is a Canadian film, so maybe that that sort of recognition or that title doesn't even apply, but regardless, this is... without a doubt. Look, I've seen a lot of great work from her. I think she's, you know, given amazing performances. Even in The Idol, a show I fucking hated, she was fantastic in that, and really just continued to show her range. But I feel like here, she shows a side of her that we just really haven't gotten to see yet, and I think, honestly, it ends up walking away as maybe the best performance she's given to date, because there's just so much more that the character of Sam is dealing with in this movie. On one hand, yes, she does still get to be a lot of fun, and she does get to have a lot of jokes, and she still has that, like, sort of snarky personality we've come to associate her with, but she also is playing someone that has grown kind of broken and kind of jaded and not really into, you know, doing comedy anymore, and seeing her kind of play these two different sides of herself, one that is a lot more optimistic and you know, lighthearted, versus someone who has been much more hardened by her experiences, I think is just so well handled. She just does such a great job at making this character feel so dimensional throughout, and, you know, adding so many more layers that I think a lesser actor just simply couldn't. And I think after watching this film, I can confidently say she's probably one of the best actresses, I think, working today, and just anything that she does, I will definitely be there for, and I think she gives a really great performance in this film. The other performance I really do want to highlight here, though, is Olga Pesta, who plays Brooke, and Brooke is someone who Sam forms this relationship with. She becomes, like, her babysitter, and I thought she was fantastic in this movie. Brooke is someone who is kind of dealing with a lot of parental drama at home. You know, her parents are not in, you know, she's not in a great headspace, and there's a lot of things that she's kind of struggling with, and you can kind of see how, and seeing how their relationship evolves throughout this movie, you know, starting off as someone who really is just very closed off, doesn't really want a babysitter, isn't really into the idea of it at all, and then slowly opening up more to her. I mean, I thought that she just gave a really strong performance here. I really enjoyed their chemistry throughout the film, and I thought they worked really well together. I also really like the directing in this movie. I think that Ali Pankau does a really good job at, being able to incorporate such different tones throughout this movie. On one hand, like I said, this movie can be very fun, but on the other, there is this looming sense of darkness and sort of this, like, riveting sort of nature throughout. Something I did not really know going into this is that this film is very much a mystery. While yes, there is, like I said, a good sense of comedy, a lot of this movie is trying to figure out how we got from point A to point B. How did, Sam end up in the state that she was in? What ended up happening to Brooke? There's all these different questions, and I thought that, she did a really good job of keeping it exciting throughout, and I thought that her directing and her style was just very strong here. I really enjoyed the way that she went about it, and I think the central premise alone is a really good one. I like the idea that we're focusing on this comedian that is kind of been going through a lot, and she's kind of at this crossroads, and she's not really in the greatest headspace, but then also kind of seeing how exactly, she has gotten to this point. I think all of that is really well handled. The issue for me is that I don't really know if the structure of this film is necessarily beneficial to the story that they're telling. Now, not to say that I don't necessarily like the flashback structure of this movie. I think the way they told the story, it definitely works. My issue with the film is that because we know what's going to happen, what ends up happening in those flashbacks, it just isn't nearly as, what ends up happening in the present day, it just isn't nearly as interesting as what's going on in those flashbacks. That's really when I found myself more engrossed with this movie. I like seeing the relation between Brooke and Sam. I like seeing, all the tumultuous stuff that ends up happening, how exactly the two of them get to the point that they are, kind of diving deeper into who they are as characters. I thought all of that was really well done. So whenever we come back to the present, I just wasn't nearly as into it. It takes a long time, actually, for things to really start moving in the direction that you want it to. Like I said, a good portion of this film is a mystery, but it takes a while to even really get to that point. For a long time, Sam is kind of in the state where she doesn't really want to do much, and she's kind of like I said, closed herself off to everybody as a result of something that's happened to her, and it just isn't that exciting to watch. You're kind of just waiting for things to get moving. So, like I said, the flashbacks for me is really when the film was at its best, when I was really into what was happening. For a long time, I just wasn't really feeling that connection to the present day. But then once the plot actually sets into motion, that's when things do kick off. That's when things get a little bit more interesting. The problem is at that point, it just felt a little bit too rushed. It felt like the film took too long to get to the exciting stuff. It felt like the film took a bit too long to really get things going. So, like, once we actually start off the mystery, it just feels like full speed ahead and there's almost no time to breathe. And I wish that there was just a bit better. I just wish the film had a bit more of a pace to it. I think there should have been a bit more momentum going on there, because for a while, I was very unsure where this was really all going to go. And I suppose that's good because, it goes in a direction that definitely did have me pretty hooked. But again, like I said, the present day stuff was not really working out for me as well. And I think a large part of that is just the characters that we're following, I just didn't really feel that much of a connection to. When it came to her friends, when it came to some of the other characters we come across, I just didn't really feel that drawn to them as a result. I didn't really feel that connection. I had a really hard time latching on to, those characters. And it also doesn't help that, unfortunately, I don't think their performances are that great either. I think the two performances I mentioned are really good here, but their performances I wasn't really a big fan of. I did like Brooke's mom. I thought she did a good job, but like all the Sam's friends and things like that, I just didn't think were that great in terms of actors. And then when we eventually do get to the moment of finding out what happened to Sam, it is very effective, like, admittedly, but it definitely felt like it came a little too late into the movie, to the point where there just wasn't really a lot of time at that point to fully process it. It feels like we get to see what happened to her, and it's every bit as devastating and horrifying as you're expecting, but it just didn't really feel like they gave us time to really let that soak in and see the impact this has had on her, which, again, like, they're kind of showed in the beginning, but because we don't really know the information, I just kind of felt at a distance from what was going on. Once I knew more of what was happening, I felt way more of a connection. But again, at that point, it just felt a bit too late. But really, other than that, I think there's a lot that this film does do really well. I like what I say about stand-up comedy as well, with her kind of struggling to get back to that point, but also seeing why she wants to be a stand-up comedian, why this is so important to her, how she's able to, channel all of the stuff that, how she is using comedy as a way to get through everything. I think all of that is really well handled here. So there's a lot that this film does do very well. Again, I just think structurally and some of the, plotting and things like that, the way it's set up, it kind of does do a disservice to the film, and that really is the thing that holds it back for me, as well as some of the acting being a bit shaky. But really, other than that, there's a lot to really enjoy about this one. Like, I think also what this film has to say about, like, PTSD and, sort of this, sense of guilt, I think is really well handled in this movie. Sam is a character that, even like I said, in those moments in the present day that wasn't really clicking for me, I still felt connected to. I still felt like there was something to latch onto there. Despite the fact that I didn't know a lot of what was going on, I really did enjoy what they were doing with her character. Seeing her at her best and her worst, I thought did actually work pretty effectively. So again, I don't think the structure of this movie is the problem. It's just, again, the way they chose to go about things specifically in the present day, I don't think necessarily was the most effective. I think it just takes a little bit to really settle in. For a long time, we're hearing about what happened to, we're hearing about all this stuff, but Sam doesn't really want to get involved, and then eventually she does, and it just takes a long time to get to that point. And again, I felt so much more drawn to the flashbacks and what was going on there, and I just didn't feel as connected to the present day as a result. Like I said, I think it's been a pretty underseen film at this point, so I don't really want to get into it too much, but it is a film that I definitely do recommend you check out. It is on Netflix right now, so I think that alone should be enough of an incentive for you to watch it. So overall, really did enjoy this one. B for I Used to Be Funny. I think especially if you've enjoyed Rachel Sennett's previous films, this is very much a must-watch in that way, because this is by far, I think, her career best performance so far. Oh my god, after God knows how long, I'm finally talking about Longlegs on this channel. Look, Longlegs, I don't even think I need to really get into it. This is one of the most anticipated films for a lot of people of this year. I think it's had probably one of the greatest marketing campaigns I've truly ever seen. The fact that this was like a small indie film from distributing from Neon, and it had the cultural impact that it did, that in itself is a big feat. And in my opinion, I think it very much did live up to the hype. Now, yes, is this not the most terrifying film that some people claimed it would be? And no, I wouldn't really say that. It's very unsettling. It's definitely very eerie, and definitely had me on the edge of my seat multiple times. I think that it is a very daunting experience. I think that it is a very frightening experience for sure, but I wouldn't even necessarily call it a full-on horror film. Towards the end, definitely it goes more into that territory, but for a while, this is very much more of this crime thriller, and it's a very effective one at that. I think a lot of the things that work really well in this film, I mean, right off the bat, Oz Perkins' directing is just fantastic here. He's always been such a great director when it comes to building tension. The way that he is able to, really create this sense of dread throughout this entire movie and have you just so fearful of what's going to happen even when it seems like nothing is happening. It really is just a testament to how great of a director that he really is. This film really kind of takes you on this like journey, and you don't fully know what you're getting yourself into, but you're also just so intrigued to see what it's going to be. And I think that his directing, it's just so strong here. Like I said, he's such a master when it comes to crafting tension in scenes, and this film really just makes a great case for that. But what I also like is that I feel like he is holding back a lot more in this film. This feels a little bit more restrained from some of his other directorial efforts, and I think it is that much better as a result. I like the fact that he saves a lot of the more horror-centric moments till like the third act of this movie. A lot of the time, this film, like I said, it's way more of this slow build, but there also is a very intriguing, but you also are very engrossed in this, crime thriller and what's going on and the way that he's able to center it all together. I think he just did a really great job here. The performances also are just absolutely extraordinary. Micah Monroe is someone I've always been a really big fan of, but I think she gives such a fantastic performance in this film. She's playing this character that is very much affected by what's going on, but yet she has to try to internalize it as best as she can and not try to let it destroy her. But you can see throughout the film how increasingly harder it is to do that. And there's this one scene especially where she finally just kind of releases all of that built up stress, and it is probably some of the finest work I've ever seen from her as an actor. I think she just is fantastic in this movie. Really, again, just represents somebody that is trying to stay sane during a case that is anything, is trying to stay sane and remain somewhat, guarded in a case that is anything but humane. I think she just does such a phenomenal job here. But Nicolas Cage, I mean, really, we gotta give credit to him because, look, he really shows a side of himself in this movie that I did not know that he was fully capable of. Yes, he has those moments where he's going all crazy and he's doing all this shit, but my God, does he commit to this role? And I think what he does so well here is that he is doing a lot of his regular shtick. He's doing a lot of, over-the-top moments. He's, singing, he's shouting, he's, doing a lot of stuff. And there are people who are going to find it funny. There were people in my audience even who found it funny. But for me, why it works so well is because he's doing it in a far more demented and sinister way than we have seen up to this point. And again, because of how much Cage commits, it really does end up working. And it really does leave this impact on you. I mean, there are certain moments with him in this movie that I'm truly never going to forget. And I think he just did such a fantastic, such a amazing job here at, again, doing what he does best, but doing it in a completely different context. And I was just really impressed by his performance in this film. Blair Underwood also is very good here, but the screenplay is really what I have to praise in this film. I think that the writing in this film is just absolutely superb. What I really like about it is, again, they really do a good job of just slowly revealing the details of what's going on. You know that Long Legs is out there, you know that there's this killer, and you know that there's all these different murders that are happening, but you don't really understand, how it's really going down, what's really kept this going all this time, what is the connection between all these different, murders, and I think the film does a good job at really posing those questions to you and keeping you invested throughout, but also doing a good job of centering it on these characters, because someone like Micah Monroe's character, there's a lot that we gradually find out about her. For a while, we don't really know all that much other than, like I said, she's this detective that just seems so incredibly stressed and she's not really taken seriously, and a lot of people don't see her as, someone that is really well equipped for this role, but she really is just trying to prove them wrong in this precinct that doesn't fully respect her, and I think she does a really good job with that. But then also diving deeper into her past, her relationship with her mom especially is a very interesting part of this movie, and there's many directions that this film goes, and I think that was another point I really loved here, and there's many directions this film goes that really does catch you off guard, but doing it in the best way. And again, it's because of how well they build up to it in this film. It never feels like we are getting this stuff too late into the film. It feels like they have done just they've planted just enough seeds to where now you can give us that reveal and it feels earned. And once we get to the moment where everything just starts to unravel, holy shit, this film just really takes off and really just becomes something truly horrific that I think you are never going to forget. The cinematography here also just really well done. It's very dreary and it has this sort of very gothic sense to it, and I think that's something that was also really well done here. The score, I really do love a lot to this film. There's really just so much that works so well here. Like I said, I think the way it crafts tension especially is something that is just really going to stick with a lot of people. There are many moments that definitely did have me quite frightened throughout this film. And even, you know, small things like the way that they hide Nicolas Cage's face in the movie. Yes, it does feel deliberate, and some people can say maybe that was just a marketing tactic, but I think it really does work in this film. I think, you know, the less we see, the way we first see Longlegs to how we view him by the end of this movie, it works really well. You really get a sense of, you know, they really do a good job of relying on Nicolas Cage's performance and then slowly peeling back the layers quite literally as we start to eventually see more of his face. And that interrogation scene between the two is by far one of the highlights of this entire movie. Something else to really talk about in this movie is that I don't get a lot of close-ups with the actors. It's mostly just all in wides, and it creates this sense of discomfort and this sort of like claustrophobic feeling that works really well because we aren't really seeing their reactions. We can always see what's happening from behind them or on the other side, and that makes the film that much more scary as a result. There's one moment in particular where I think that works really well, just again because of the fact that it's in a wide the entire time. You can always see what's going on here and here, and that is very deliberate because it makes for some of the most effectively scary moments in the entire movie. So I think just choices like that, I think, were just really brilliant and really helped enhance this film into something special. So there really is just a lot that works really well here. The only thing I think that really does bring this film down is towards the end, we get a lot of reveals, and I don't think that it was presented in a way that was unsatisfying. I've seen a lot of people say there's this huge information dump and it just felt like too much, and I can understand that, but for me, again, I felt like the film really earned it. I feel like they did a good job of just like slowly revealing things that at this point in the movie, it felt like, okay, this is the moment where we really just need to kind of go back and see how it all fits together. My issue is that right when it seems like we're getting to the point where, you know, things are going to start to get resolved, the movie just kind of abruptly ends, and I was just a little bit unsatisfied. Like, I just need at least 5 to 10 minutes more to really just process everything, and I think the film would have been even better if that was a result. But it really doesn't take away from just how incredible of a film this really is when it comes to the great directing from Oz Perkins, who I think really is making a name for himself as one of the directors to watch out for when it comes to horror. I can't wait to see what he does with The Monkey next year. Two incredible performances from Micah Monroe and Nicolas Cage. Blair Underwood, like I said, really great here too. Kiernan Shipka also has a very small role in this movie, but a very memorable one. She doesn't have a lot to do, but the scene that she has, I have not been able to stop thinking about since I saw this movie. It is quite unsettling, to say the least, and it's definitely something that's really gonna stick with you. It does an amazing job of building tension. It's got some really great cinematography, some very effective scares when they're there. This is really just everything you could really want in a film like this, and while, like I said, yes, I think towards the end there are just some things I want a little bit more clarification on, it really doesn't take away from just how effective of a film that this really is. So overall, Longlegs is a film that I just really loved a lot, and I am going to give it an A. Alright, so Twisters honestly was much better than I was expecting. I kind of went into this thinking that this was going to be just like a very throwaway sequel that just didn't really have a lot put into it, but I gotta say, this was a much stronger sequel than I expected. Now, the first film, I will say, I do think is pretty solid. It's, you know, mostly a, like, typical, like, disaster film from, like, the 90s that you kind of expect to see. There's some really fun performances in there, but overall, it's not really a film that I got all that much from, other than I thought it was just a lot of fun. You know, Bill Paxton and Helen Hunt giving some really strong performances, some not great performances as well. The other girl whose name is escaping me, not really a big fan of her performance in there, but it's definitely cheesy, it's definitely over the top, and look, is this film any less on that level? No, this film is still very over the top, but it kind of knows it, and it really does run with it, and in my opinion, it just does things better than the first movie did. For example, when it comes to a character perspective, I think this film is a lot stronger. Daisy Edgar-Jones, you know, similar to Helen Hunt, has had an incident in her past involving a twister, but I think here it just feels a lot more prevalent. The opening scene of this movie in particular, it's very thrilling, but it also ends up being quite devastating, and really you have this very strong arc for Jones as a result. You kind of see why she is, where she's at, why this is haunting her, this survivor's guilt of sorts that she's having as a result of this tragedy. And I think overall she just gives a really strong performance in this movie. I really enjoyed her arc throughout this film, where she ends up going and how her, why she decides to, throw herself back into this situation. I thought she overall did a really great job. But Glenn Powell, once again, is just so great in this movie. Tyler Owens is such a fun character, and what I like about this film as well is they really do take advantage of the modern setting. What would someone being a tornado wrangler, the idea that he's made like a name for himself on social media as a result is a really fun idea, and this film really does end up going for it. Him being this really big like influencer of sorts, and him having this whole backing and like team behind him, I think is a really fun idea. But again, also they do some really good stuff with this character. One of my favorite scenes in the movie involves him talking to Daisy Edgar-Jones's character and kind of just getting her to understand like why someone would want to be a tornado wrangler. Why would anyone want to research that kind of stuff? I feel like this film just makes a better case for why someone would go in that line of work, and I honestly found myself pretty convinced by that scene. I was like, okay, yeah, honestly that makes a lot of sense, and I found myself really drawn to both of these characters as a result. I think the chemistry between these two is really solid. They play off each other really well. I think they're one of the best parts of the entire movie, and I think all of that is really great. Anthony Ramos, also a lot of fun here. A lot of really strong acting in this movie for sure. Also really enjoyed, I really enjoyed Marissa, really enjoyed Maura Tierney for what she had as well. She's not in the movie a ton, but she actually does have a bit more of a crucial role than I expected her to, and I thought that she was really good here for the moments that she had. I thought all the acting was really great here. But really, I think the biggest draw for me coming into this film, the thing that made me the most interested, was the fact that Lee Isaac Chung was behind it. Now, if you remember, Lee Isaac Chung, the previous film he's done was Minari, which was very much this like very authentic look at a family and them trying to migrate to America and their sort of struggles that they're having in doing so. And I think that, and then them immigrating to America and the struggles they're having in doing so. I think that film was one of the best films of 2020. I would not have expected him for this to be his next project, but he really does do a great job when it comes to the directing. I think what he does really well here is he takes the idea of a summer blockbuster and just ups the ante in a way that makes this film a lot more riveting to watch, but also gives it a much bigger sense of heart. I really did feel connected to these characters, but also really did feel for them in quite a few key emotional moments, and I think it's Chun's directing that really does work very well here. He knows when to focus on characters, but he also knows when to play up the more, ridiculous elements of this film, and I think he really does go for it in that regard. So I really did enjoy his directing here. I already touched upon the screenplay and how I just think it's a lot better this time around. When it comes down to the action, though, I mean, that's where this film, that's the thing you get excited for. That's the thing that you are probably going to remember the most, and it really does end up delivering here. There was one scene in particular in a movie theater towards the end that I was generally on the edge of my seat during. I thought that whole set piece was really well constructed, and that's only one of many really great sequences in this film. I like that they really just kind of go for it, and yes, sometimes, like I said, it can get a bit ridiculous. I think if you're watching this movie and you're trying to like endlessly nitpick the decisions these characters make, that's fine. You might not be watching the right movie if you're doing that, just because like this film, logic is not really a thing, and I think the second that you are able to accept that, I think the more enjoyment you'll really get out of it. But I understand that that might be like a deal breaker for some people. For me, I just kind of had a lot of fun with this, and honestly was a lot more, just again, I had a lot more of a fun experience with this than I really did expect to. Even the country music, I'm not a country music guy at all. It is easily my least favorite genre of music. I honestly really did enjoy it here, though. I thought it really did add to the mood of this film really well. It gave this film this sort of, it gave the film a sense of liveliness. I thought it worked really well in the moments where they implemented it. I just overall had a really great time with this movie. I think if you want just like a fun summer blockbuster, I think this film really does check all the boxes, but also has some really solid characters, some really great performances, a generally very satisfying ending. There's just a lot that this film does do really well. I think the only thing that does bring it down for me is that, like I said, sometimes the film can get a little too over the top, and there definitely were some moments that were a bit too hard to take seriously. Also, I did feel there were some characters we just didn't really get enough of. We get to see enough of Tyler's group, but the other group we're following in this movie, we really don't get to see enough of, and I thought that they were kind of underwritten as a result. Anthony Ramos also, his storyline in this film, I did enjoy, but I just didn't feel as satisfied as I wanted to by the time it wrapped up, and I wish they could have done just a little bit more with him. But other than that, I mean, this film really was much better than I was expecting it to. Like I said, going into it, I didn't really know what to expect, but I feel like this is just a quintessential summer blockbuster in really all the best ways, and it just does a really great job of being this film that I think you're going to have a really fun time with, but also has some really grounded characters and some surprisingly emotional moments, and overall just ends up being a really solid film as a result. So overall, I really enjoyed this one. So B+ for Twisters. Like I said, I think it's ever so slightly better than the first movie. First movie's still a lot of fun. It's just this one, I think, did most of the things that film did just a bit better overall. Alright, so it's very clearly many weeks later, as you can tell, but we're gonna go ahead and just wrap up with the, well, not wrap up, we still have like 10 movies to talk about, but we're gonna talk about this next one, which is one that I can't believe has taken me this long to finally discuss, and that is Sing Sing. And what's interesting about this film, right off the bat, is that before we get into the actual, like, you know, quality of the film, is that this is a film that, one, I was very excited for, but two, very possibly could have been a film that I almost might not have been able to see in theaters, and I'll get into why. But, you know, basically they have those, like, AMC Screen Unseen things that they do every single month, or these days like twice or three times a month. Most of the time I don't end up going to them because it usually is for a film that is coming out that week that I will get to see sometime later in the week anyway, or it's for a movie that I just don't have any real interest in. But this time was different because I was hearing rumors, you know, rumblings out there that there's a possibility that it might be Sing Sing. So I made sure I went to it fully prepared that it was going to be something that I was not at all excited for, and like was like really not interested in, and just getting that out of the way. Hoping that it wasn't going to be, though, trying to keep up hope that it wasn't going to end up being like fucking Fabulous 4 or something, which I still haven't seen up to this point. Maybe I'll watch it at some point, but I have not watched it since, you know, since, at least since, you know, in this video, around the time that I'm doing this video. Maybe I'll watch it later in the year, we'll see, I don't know. But, to my delights, it was very much Sing Sing, and thank God, because this is easily one of, I think, the best films of the entire year. One of the things I love about it right off the bat really is just Greg Quitter's, his directing to this movie, I think, is absolutely incredible, because when you go into a film like this, and it's about, you know, a bunch of men in prison, you would expect that this film is going to be very hard-hitting, very emotional, and it is, but not quite in the way that you would suspect. Normally, films like this, you know, there's this sense of dread, there's this sense of hopelessness, there is this, you know, depression that's looming over the entire movie, and it's like a really hard watch. But the difference with this film is that Quidar recognizes that there are about a half a dozen films about the prison system that are very hard to watch, that deal into, you know, that go into the harsh realities that prisoners have to deal with, how unfair that system can be, all the, you know, psychological trauma that, you know, ends up, that the toll it ends up taking on. There are so many movies about that. This film is almost the antithesis to that, because it is way more about trying to find hope and trying to find this sense of community, this sense of belonging in an environment that is supposed to be extremely debilitating, in an environment that is supposed to be strenuous and break you down and make you feel less humane than ever before. And that is what an incredible film like Sing Sing, and that's really, I think, why a film like Sing Sing is one that we desperately need right now, because essentially we're focusing on this group of prisoners who spend their day-to-day lives, when they're not going through, all the prison activities that they have to do, involving themselves in something as lighthearted and fun as just putting on a theater production. And knowing that's what this film was going to be about already had me very excited, but getting to see how it played out in this movie, I was a really big fan of. I mean, again, just seeing all these guys get together and try to find some sort of shared love that kind of helps break the stress that they're dealing with, but also use it as an outlet to express their feelings and not constantly feel, constantly break down those barriers that they are so afraid to. I think Clarence Macklin's character is a perfect example of this. This is a guy that is incredibly hard, very rough around the edges. He is someone who has this very, tough exterior and seems very hard to crack. He just has this, chip on his shoulder of sorts, and throughout the movie, you can see, as he gets deeper into this theater production, he does start to, he does start to soften his shell a bit, and you start to he starts to open up more, and you really start to understand more about his character and what he's really dealing with, and he becomes one of the best characters within this entire movie, and his performance especially is one that I think everyone has been praising, and rightfully so. Not just because of the fact that it is an incredible performance, but also because this is a guy who is an actual prisoner. In fact, most of the actors in this movie, aside from Coleman Domingo and Paul Raci, were all prisoners at one point in their life. They might not be, I don't believe they are anymore, but this is their story. This is what they did. This is what they participated in, and that was not something I knew going into this, but I think it just adds this authenticity to the film that generally just wouldn't be there if that wasn't the case. I think each of these actors, despite the fact that they aren't actors, you wouldn't be able to tell because they're just so natural in the way they convey these characters. I don't know how true to life this is. I don't know if they changed some things up, but I have to imagine that this was a really impactful role for most of them, getting to sort of reenact this period of their life that they probably look at much more fondly because of those productions that they were involved in. And I think that's something that this film just does a really good job at diving into. But Macklin's performance in particular is one that I think a lot of people are going to praise here. But Coleman Domingo, absolutely, should not be overlooked in any way. In fact, I think this might just be his best performance to date. I think the character of Divine G is just one you really find yourself attached to. He is somebody who, throughout all of this, he is just so committed to trying to put on a production, how much this matters to him, how there are so many individuals that are constantly trying to, naysay what he's doing or are trying to, question what he's doing and not really understand, logically if this makes sense, if this is conducive to this environment. Why are you, so committed to this? And there's this great scene where he just kind of lays it all out and you really understand his point of view. And I think that Domingo just does such a great job at playing this character who is really just someone who tries to keep this, positive and upbeat attitude, but behind all of that is in a lot of pain. He's very hurt. He's he's in prison for a crime that he very much did not commit, and he's trying to find a way outside of it. And so you kind of see him balancing that, but also trying to go about, directing, being the head of this theater, community. And I think that he just does such an amazing job here. I think this is the role that Domingo has really been needing for a while now. He has really earned for a while now. He's always been such an incredible actor, but he's never really gotten to lead a film in the way he does here. Even Rustin last year, I think that was a really good performance, but that was a very, showy performance that at times was definitely a strong performance from him, but definitely felt a little bit more one note. This performance is far more layered and requires a lot more out of him, and I think it is easily, as a result, his finest work to date, and I just really love the performance he gives here. Paul Raci, also very good here. All the actors, like I said, do a really phenomenal job in this film. The screenplay also is just really well done here, just getting to see all the different aspects of this production, what all these characters are going through, but also what it means to so many of them. They all have different ideas that they want to incorporate into this production, and they find a way to do it so seamlessly. One of them wants to, have pirates, one of them wants to have Freddy Krueger, one of them wants time travel, and the way they're able to combine all those elements so seamlessly, you really are rooting for them to put on this show throughout it all, and I think that the film does do a really good job with that, but again, it also remembers to be primarily focused on these characters and how they are finding a way to, how they are finding a way to, channel to use this production as a way to channel all of the emotion, all of the dread that they are feeling, how they are finding a way to internalize it for good and not try to, and break down in a way that feels human, in a way that feels vulnerable, show those vulnerabilities, expose those insecurities. I think this film does a really good job with that. There's one scene in particular involving this conversation with Divine G and this other inmate, and them kind of talking about some similar experiences that they've had, and I thought that was easily one of the most impactful scenes of the entire film. Just in general, I think this is just such a powerful film that a lot of people, that honestly has gone underseen and really should not have been. This was supposed to be like A24's like big awards film, heading into the Oscars, and I really don't think it's going to be anymore, and that really is A24's fault. They did not give this film the proper marketing that it deserves. They did not give it the proper, I think, release that it deserves. Even a wide release, it never came to my regular theater, aside from that one showing I talked about. It was in a couple other theaters, but it never went as wide as it should have, and I think as a result, it is going to go a bit more underseen than it really should, but I cannot encourage enough for you to check this one out. Like I said, I know the prison dramas, some people might be turned off by that because usually they are very tough to watch, but this one, like I said, it's far more uplifting. It is far more concerned about trying to lift your, it is much more concerned about, again, trying to find a sense of hope in a system that feels kind of hopeless, focusing on these characters that you really just find yourself so attached to, but also really just showing a different side to the prison system that we really haven't seen before. How, something that is so strenuous, how you can find yourself lost in this activity that helps you become a better person, that helps you learn things about yourself, that helps you kind of, be willing to become more accepting, be willing to, be less hard on yourself. I mean, this film just has so many fantastic things to say, and I think all of it is handled so well in this film. Just easily one of the best films of the entire year. Really can't recommend this one enough. Also, fantastic ending, one that really just like tugs at your heartstrings in the best possible way. Like I said, it is definitely very heart-wrenching at points, but never in a way that is hard to watch, never in a way that feels, too emotional, or in a way that is going to really like wreck you. I think this film, again, it's way more about uplifting you and trying to find positive lights in a community that's in an environment that seems kind of hard to do so in. I think this film just does a really good job in diving into all of that. So with all that said, I'm absolutely going to give Sing Sing overall an A. Alright, so Trap was a movie I was very excited for. M. Night Shyamalan admittedly has been kind of hit or miss for me lately. I think he's had some good films, like Knock at the Cabin last year, which I really liked. It was, very simplistic and didn't really go off the rails in the way his other films did, and I think, he definitely has done a good job with that. Split, obviously, was a really great film, but for every Split and Knock at the Cabin, there is an Old, which I think was just kind of his worst impulses all combined into one. It was just just way too out there. It was way too alienating. It was trying to be, it didn't really know what it wanted to be. It didn't really have like a cohesive narrative, and just completely just lost me the more it went on. So Trap, I really thought was going to be like a real comeback of sorts. This felt like this could really be a film that just really just reignites, because he really did play things safely with Knock at the Cabin, considering that is mostly based off of previous source material. He did deviate a bit from it in the ending, but not in the way you typically expect M. Night to be. So it really did seem like Trap was going to be the film that, like, you know, fully puts him back on the map. This is going to be the one where he gets his shit together, and it's going to be something really special. It's going to be something really effective, and sometimes it is. There are things about this movie that does overall, that there are a lot of things about this movie that does really work. For one, Josh Hartnett in this movie is fantastic. I think he does a phenomenal job playing this character, who is incredibly layered, because yes, he is this serial killer of sorts, but you really do see how he is trying to kind of fool everybody throughout the film, how he does it under the guise of this dad who is this, you know, pushover of sorts, and he is someone who, you know, seems to have a lot of love for his daughter, and he seems to really care about his family, but yet also he is this serial killer, and the way he's able to kind of, you know, balance all of that, but also not really balance all that. You see, like, how difficult it is throughout this movie, how he's trying to maintain, you know, all these different facades about himself, and is struggling to do so. I think he just does a really great job with. I think he's super charismatic in this role. I think he is very easy to latch onto, but you also do feel that sinister presence throughout the movie, and I think that Hartnett does a really great job at playing this character. I thought that his performance was just really well done here. I also liked his daughter in the movie. I thought that she gave a really strong performance for the stuff that she had. She doesn't have as much to do as I suspected that she was going to. I thought she was maybe going to be like a co-lead of sorts, and she is at first, but we'll get into later maybe not having as much to do, but I think for the stuff she had, she does do a really good job. She is by far the most, I would say, logical character in this entire movie, and I think that, you know, she did a really good job here. Allison Pill is an actress I really like, and I thought that she did a very good job in this film. I didn't know she was going to be in this, but you know, the stuff that she has, I think she does do a really good job with. And the things I think that do work really well about this movie, first of all, I think M. Night's directing in this film is really solid, particularly in the first, like, 45-ish to 50 minutes of this film. I think is very effective. It is deceptively simple. It very much is just this guy and his daughter. They're going to this concert, and there is this there's this serial killer that's on the loose, and they have basically designed this entire event as a way to kind of trap this guy once and for all and try to take him out. But it turns out that Josh Hartnett is that serial killer, and you're kind of seeing him try to weasel his way through all these different, different schemes to try to find a way to outdo them, try to find a way to, escape and make sure that he isn't caught. And I think that section of the movie is very effective. I think that they use the concert setting very well here. You really do get the sense that, you are in this environment where, you could be exposed at any point. And the way that he is able to consistently, trick people without blowing his cover, you really just see how the kind of serial killer that he is, how well trained he is at what he's doing. And I think, again, the film is very effective in that way. But also seeing how elaborate this whole thing has been staged, and how it seems nearly impossible for him to get out of this situation. While at the same time, yes, he's a serial killer, at the same time, I think Hartnett plays the role in a way that is somewhat likable, that you also kind of want to see him get out of it. I think the movie does do a good job at balancing that, and like I said, I think the first 45 minutes or so, it works really well. The concert setting, I think the film really does take full advantage of. You really do feel like you are alongside Hartnett throughout this entire ride. The concert scenes as well actually do work pretty well. Yes, at points it can feel like this vanity project of sorts for M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, considering that she is trying to be this, musical artist of sorts, but she's good at what she does, and so I really didn't have too much of an issue with it. I think the film also is shot incredibly well. There's some some very effective moments here, cinematography-wise, that really does keep you on edge throughout. You know, quite a few shots in particular that has definitely stuck with me ever since seeing the movie back in August. And so again, I think there's a lot of things that work really well here. But then, you know, there's a point in the movie where it's like, oh wow, this is really wrapping up. I guess this film is very well paced. I can't believe we're already almost at the end. And then the film takes a turn. And once it does, it honestly kind of ended up losing me from there. And look, that's not to say that I think this was bad, necessarily. I think for M. Night Shyamalan, especially, a director that sometimes can go in some incredibly wild and just really maddening directions, this film is not nearly as off the rails. This film is not nearly as ridiculous as some of his others have been. Yes, there are some logical things that I think if you want to, you know, kind of, if that's something that you're bothered by, that might be an issue in this movie. I've seen quite a few people take issue with that. Never really bothered me all that much because I was still invested in what was going on. Unfortunately, when the film does end up kind of switching gears a bit and turns into something else, I wasn't nearly as invested because it just got a little too ridiculous for my liking. At the point with the concert and things like that, you know, the directions, yes, maybe were a little bit silly, but again, it made sense for who this character was, the situations that they were involved in. I didn't really have too much of an issue with it, but suddenly the film becomes something much different, and characters that weren't as important become much more important in the second half of this movie. Suddenly, logic that things that we were told early on kind of get thrown out. There are multiple points where it feels like the movie is going to go in some really fucked up direction and a place that is going to really just like catch you off guard, and I was really waiting for it to happen. I was waiting for there to be a bigger point to this. I was waiting for there to be some bigger reveal, and it just never ended up happening, and I honestly found myself pretty underwhelmed. And look, I can't believe I'm saying that about an M. Night Shyamalan movie, who, like I said, I think, you know, he's had some really great twists, but then sometimes his twists don't really work. This was a film that I think just needed something more to it, because it really did feel like there was just something missing here. The puzzle pieces just were not connecting in the way that they really could. There are many scenes that just really end up dragging on. The film, I think, also just ends up getting very repetitive in the second half, and it didn't feel nearly as tight as it really should have. I think, like I said, once you end up going out, once the film ends up switching gears, it just kind of felt like a different movie, and I just don't think it ended up working nearly as well as the first like 45 to 50 minutes. I think, like I said, you know, when the film is these two characters in this concert, I think it works really well, but once it does kind of take a turn, it just wasn't nearly as strong at that point, and the ending as well just really left me unsatisfied. I found myself just really hoping that there would be a little bit more to this, and there really just wasn't. There's also things that we spend time on that I'm just not really sure why we need to spend so much time on, and it just really ended up hurting the movie for me. So again, not at all a bad movie. There are definitely things that do work here. I think the only other thing I do have to say is Salika Shyamalan in this movie, look, I don't think that she is as bad of an actress as people have said. I actually do think she had some pretty solid moments, but I think the problem with her is that she just doesn't have that big of a role at first, and then there's a point in this movie where suddenly she becomes a lot more prominent, and I just don't think she is there yet as an actress. I think she needs a bit more time to kind of grow, and I think that that could have been a little bit more effective. I think if they would have given her more to do in the front half of this movie, I think it really could have worked, but unfortunately the film is very reliant on her acting at points, and it just isn't nearly as effective, especially when you compare her against like Josh Hartnett, or like I said, even I think his daughter in the movie I think is a little bit stronger than she was, so I wasn't really a huge fan of that. This is by no means a bad movie though. I do really, you know, I like the vision that Shyamalan had. I think there are some really intriguing moments here. There's definitely quite a few moments that had me on edge throughout this movie. I think, like I said, Josh Hartnett's performance is very strong here. There's some really great cinematography. There's some really great shots in this film. The score, actually, I really liked a lot. I liked a lot of the songs that we end up getting from Lady Raven here, and I have been not listening to them recently, but when the movie came out, I was listening to it quite a bit. So overall, I think it honestly ends up being pretty average, which is disappointing because I do think the film actually did start off quite effective. it's just the more it went on, the more it just ended up kind of losing me, and I just wasn't really as invested in what was going on. So with all that said, I am going to give Trap overall a C+. Okay, so this one was a long time coming, I think. If you remember, I reviewed the theatrical cuts of both Rebel Moons, like back when this was coming out. The intention was to then review the director's cuts, but they were just so long, I just could not find time to watch both of them, so I finally was able to do that, and then that's essentially when I started this video, and yeah, they are, you know, at the time, if you didn't see my reviews for the original cuts, not a big fan. Felt that they just seemed very rushed, didn't really seem like they had much of a style, really felt like they were missing a sense of vision from Zack Snyder, and just didn't really feel like it would work. And, you know, what I said in that video is that with the director's cuts coming out, hopefully this can give us a much better sense of what he's trying to do. And yeah, these, for the most part, are like leagues ahead of the director's cuts. They're still not perfect. Like, I'll still get into things that don't work, but compared to the director's cuts, like, wow, is this an improvement? I mean, right off the bat, I think just the idea to split this into two parts, you know, I said in the theatrical cut, I didn't really understand it. It felt like this could just be one movie. I still don't know if you had to make it two parts. I think you still could have made it one movie, considering that part two is not even the end. There's clearly another movie. I don't know if there's still going to be another movie coming, but there's supposed to be another movie coming because the story is like far from over yet. But I do think this film makes a much better case for why we need the two parts. First of all, if we're talking just from a, like, exposition and, like, lore perspective, I mean, it is night and day compared to this film. I think that we just get a much better understanding of just the world in general, how we really got to this point, and, you know, I think that's something this film does an incredible job with. We actually get a backstory for a character that I honestly had no interest in the theatrical films. Aris, we basically get to see, like, how he became this soldier of sorts, you know, what really happened to him, and it's generally, like, a devastating scene. I mean, you just see just how brutal and savage the Imperium are, the things that they are willing to do. They really have no limits whatsoever. They are so incredibly violent and inhumane, and just in these first, like, 20 minutes, because it is that long, you get such a better sense of this world and the turmoil that everybody's in, rather than hearing Anthony Hopkins' character explain it to you in 2 minutes. Oh my god, it's so much more effective actually seeing it play out. And, you know, that scene alone, I think, is enough of a reason to justify the director's cut's existence, and really show, like, what this, you know, really show the teeth that this film has. I think just from that moment, not just because it is so graphic, and that really is one of the major differences, that this film is so much more violent. Like, holy shit, is it more violent? But it also gives it this sense of urgency and this style that the theatrical cut simply did not have, as we dive much deeper into this character. And it's a character that, like I said, not exactly the most prominent character, but it's such a well-done sequence. You find yourself really latching onto this character and wanting to see him get out of this situation. And I just thought that whole sequence was just so incredibly well done, and just kind of a prime example of, I think, what this director's cut does a much better job with, which is those backstories. I think all of these characters just feel so much more fleshed out in this version. You know, if we're talking about someone like, say, Nemesis, you get a much better sense of how she became this swordswoman. You know, someone like, you know, a Kai, you get a much better sense of who he really is. There's way more for Jimmy to do. Jimmy actually has a purpose here. He doesn't feel separate from everything else, and that's something that I think was just way better done in this movie. All the characterization, there's just so much more depth given to all of these characters, but also the fact that it is R-rated. There is stuff that they can do here that they simply couldn't in a PG-13 film, and it just really makes me question why we needed those versions of the film in the first place. Because, well, yes, this is definitely not as, like, accessible, it is much clearer to me this is the version that Snyder intended, and there's no question about it whatsoever. And again, the fact that he chose to put out the more sanitized, unfinished version first, it just really baffles me, especially when, again, you see the detail that was put into this one. So I think those two things immediately are much better. The characters and the world building, I just have such a better job with when it comes to this one. The action sequences also, as a result, are so much better in this version. Not just because, again, you feel that connection to these characters, but also because the fact that they can let loose. They can be very violent. They can be very over the top, and the action scenes stand out that much more as a result. They're longer, they're more effective. They, like I said, they have much more of a bite to them, and I think it really does work. So that's something else that I think really did improve upon when it comes to this film. Even Noble as a villain, you know, I thought Ed Skrein did a good job, like in the theatrical cuts, but I felt way more compelled by him in this version. You understand more of, like, what is his overall goal? What does he really think he's trying to accomplish? And I think the movie does a really good job when it comes to that. So I think those are elements that really do improve. The score was never really an issue for me. I always enjoyed the score to this movie. I think really still my biggest issue is the fact that it is too long. It definitely is still too long. I think that it can feel very much, you know, like the theatrical cut does, where it feels very much like we're meeting this person, now we're meeting this person. But I would say it is less egregious in this one because I actually like the introductions we're getting. There's just that section in the middle that just isn't the most interesting. It does very much feel sort of episodic in that way. Kind of makes me think that maybe he should have just done this as like a mini-series. I think that honestly might have been his best bet because there is just so much he is packing into this like 3.5 hours. And I think that maybe it would have been better suited that way, but still, when we ultimately got to the, you know, place where everything just, like, coalesces in that first part, again, I was just way more on board with what they were doing. The twists that we get just feels way more effective here. Everything's just way better communicated in this movie. I think they just do a really good, they just do a much better job at fleshing everything out, and that's really part one. Part two, also, you know, doesn't have as drastic of changes. There's just more time for things. You know, you get a much better sense of this community that they're trying to help out. All the scenes on the farm don't feel nearly as listless as they did in the theatrical because they actually do feel like they're serving a purpose here. You get the sense that this is a community that, like, they want to fight, but they're not really well equipped, and so you kind of see them train a bit more, and I thought they did a really good job with that. Korra's backstory in this part is way more fleshed out than it was in the first one. If you remember, I said Korra I thought was the only character I felt somewhat compelled to, so you can imagine my excitement when they give her even more to do in terms of her backstory, and again, I think her character just becomes that much stronger as a result. I found myself really rooting for her, and I think that they did a really good job with that. And just in general, I think that, you know, that section of the film, the farm and everything, it doesn't feel as rushed. It feels like we get a much better sense. It doesn't feel like a music video or like they're montaging through things, and I thought that was better. But the biggest change in part two easily is that literally the last like 2 hours of the movie, which is most of the movie, mind you, is just the action. And it can feel, and this is what I will say, I do think it can feel tiring at points. Sometimes it does kind of feel like we're just watching the same things go down. But again, there is so much more depth, there's so much more character packed in between those scenes that I didn't find myself as bored. I didn't find myself as, like, waiting for the movie to end. I actually found myself more invested in what was going on. And even the love story that ends up developing in this movie, I found myself way more invested in. And I couldn't believe that because in the first time I saw part two, I was like, what is this? This feels like it's so out of nowhere, but oh my god, we have time to actually develop it and give a shit, and as a result, it is just way more, you know, it's just way easier to get attached to these characters. Who knew when you actually give time for things to breathe that it'll just make for a much more effective film overall. I know, who could have thought that, but truthfully, like, it seems like such a no-brainer, and I just don't understand why this wasn't what he initially decided to release. Because yes, these are really long. Yes, these films are really risky. Yes, they really do go for it in terms of the blood, in terms of the graphicness, in terms of the adult content. But again, it feels original. This feels much more closer to what we expect from Zack Snyder, and I think just as a result, they're just much better films overall, and it's just kind of crazy to me that he would even suggest to release something that is so dissimilar from this, as a first impression. So yeah, overall, I mean, I would just say this is just such a massive improvement pretty much all around. Yes, I do think sometimes it can be a bit overlong, and I think that maybe there are some ideas that still don't feel the most fleshed out. There's still some characters that I don't feel as attached to, but again, certain scenes like in part 2 when they're all going around the room and like talking about their backstories, it doesn't feel as forceful now. It doesn't feel as repetitive, because it feels like we're just given so much more time to care about these characters and learn more about them and really why they are here, and as a result, I just found myself so much more invested. It's just, again, it's baffling to me that Snyder would even think like, oh yeah, don't put this version out. Like, you know that version that has so much more character, that has such a better explanation of the world, that really gives off just how threatening of a presence the Imperium are, gives this, is incredibly violent and bloody, and gives this franchise a feel of its own that doesn't just seem like it's like ripping off Star Wars or Dune or something like that. Yeah, maybe don't release that version. Release the one that's like very sanitized and doesn't really have any of that. Just insane to me. Absolutely insane that he made that decision. I don't really understand why he decided to do this, because I feel like despite the fact that these are much stronger cuts, I don't feel like many people have watched them, because they just didn't care about the theatrical, so why would they bother with the extended when they are so much longer than the ones that we originally had? But I will say, I really do encourage you to check these out. I think that they are just much better movies overall. Things are moved around, things are structured differently. There are things that you probably were wondering about that are, again, just expanded upon here, and they feel a lot more impactful as a result. The performances, they just have more to do here. The story itself, what the film is trying to communicate, you just get a much better sense of here, and just in general, like, you really do see the vision that Zack Snyder has had and why he has spent so much painstaking time, working on this project. You get a much better sense of what he's really trying to accomplish here. What's unfortunate is that I really don't know if we're gonna get a follow-up here. I think, again, because of how those two theatrical films turned out, which, again, I'm saying theatrical, but these were on Netflix, so again, there's no real reason to even say like, oh, release this one wouldn't have stayed in theaters, because they were never meant to be in theaters in the first place. It was always meant to go to Netflix. I think just the fact that those two films were not successes and were so critically panned in the way they were, I don't know if a part 3 is ever going to see the light of day. But truthfully, like, these two parts are good enough to where I want to see where it goes next. I want to see the connective tissue. I want to see what else he can bring to the table. If he does get a chance to do a part 3, don't do this again. Just give us the extended cut, and I think that both of these films will and I think that this franchise will just be much better as a result overall. So, as a whole, these are both, I think, just much better films. And if I had to grade both parts overall, I would give part 1, Chalice of Blood, and part 2, which also, yes, they have new titles as well, and I think those titles actually do work pretty well, as well as Chapter 2, Curse of Forgiveness. Overall, both of them would get a B. Borderlands is the next movie we're talking about, and we're switching gears pretty quickly because we're going from a movie that I really liked a lot, that we're going from some movies that I actually really like quite a bit and was going to do a full video on because I had a lot to say about how much I enjoyed them, to an absolute fucking disaster on pretty much all fronts. And I mean, really shouldn't be that much of a surprise that it is one, just considering the production hell that this film really went through, which, I mean, you can look it up. There's multiple videos that cover it. Honestly, it is so extensive. The changing hands, the reshoots, the clashing of visions that are going on with this film, that it kind of could be its own video. But to sum it up, yeah, you can tell while watching this movie, this film is very much lacking a vision, a consistent tone. It just isn't really here. Sometimes the film wants to be something really just like fun and, lighthearted. And then other times it's trying to be something a lot darker and a little bit more complex, and you can really feel that throughout this movie, and as a result, it gives you this sense of tonal whiplash throughout, but also just made me kind of just check out. Like, I just found myself really not into anything that was going on. The dialogue also is just so fucking bad here. It's just, you can tell that this is not at all the script that was initially put out from Craig Mazin, mind you, initially did the script for this movie, and then it got so bad, he wanted his name basically just, like, stripped of it entirely. And it's crazy to think about because I really do feel like he would have been a good fit for this, considering what the material was. But as is, I mean, the dialogue is just horrible. Anytime the movie tries to be funny, it is just so desperate, and it's also so derivative. There's not a single part of this movie that feels even somewhat original. There are reasons why it has been endlessly compared to, like, Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that, because that really is just the vibe you get while you're watching this, and you just feel like you'd rather watch, like, the James Gunn version of this, which we already had the James Gunn version of this, and it's very successful at what it does. So what the fuck is the point of this? So there's that. There's also the fact that the script itself is just such an utter mess. It's so hard to really latch onto anything. All the different planets, all the different characters that we're following, you just never feel like you get a sense of anything that's going on. It feels like the script has kind of been cut in half. The characters that we meet just feel so incredibly surface level. Cate Blanchett's character, which we'll get to the performances in a bit, but her character is clearly supposed to have this, like, very, like, strongly defined arc, and when we get to it by the end of the movie, you just don't feel like there is anything that has happened that has gotten us to this point. The bond that these characters are all supposed to have also just feels really forced. It never felt like we spent enough time with them. When suddenly they started to care for each other, I honestly was just very thrown off by what was going on. So, yeah, it's just such an utter mess of a script pretty much from start to finish. But then you have the performances here, which are also just, for the most part, really bad. And it's not necessarily the actor's fault. I think there are just some actors here that are not well cast in this film. Like, I'm sorry, Kevin Hart as a bounty, never gonna work. Never gonna work. He has one mode of acting, and when he tries to deviate from it, sometimes it works, but if it's not, like, Jumanji or something, it's probably not going to. And yeah, I mean, he tries. Like, to give Kevin Hart credit, he definitely does try here. It just is not a convincing role at all, so I don't think he does a great job. Cate Blanchett, I think, is doing the best that she can, but there are also multiple points throughout this film where it just does not seem like she really wants to be here. It does seem like she is phoning it in multiple times throughout this movie, and I don't really think she does a great job. Florian Montu, also not very good here. Wasn't a big fan of his performance in this movie. Most of the actors here, again, are just really bad. Honestly, I don't think anybody looks like they are having a worse time in this film than Jamie Lee Curtis, who throughout the whole movie, it just really seems like she just wants to die. Like, she just has that sort of expression on her face, like, get me the fuck out of here. Why did I sign on to this project? Why is this turning out to be such a disaster? You just feel that throughout her performance, and it is just so crystal clear while watching it. It's not like the other performances, again, are anything noteworthy, but her performance is the one where you're like, oh, she really doesn't want to be here, and you really do feel that throughout this movie. Ariana Greenblatt is probably the only actor that I felt like gave a noteworthy performance here. I thought she actually did do a pretty good job with the character that she's playing. I think that she could have easily come across as very annoying, but she actually brings a lot of charm and fun to the character that does elevate the film in certain moments. I felt like Talking Tina, as a character, is definitely annoying, but Greenblatt helps make the character a little bit less annoying, and it makes some of the dialogue a little bit less grating. On the flip side of that, though, you have Jack Black, who normally is like a net positive in any movie you're going to be in, but 2024, it's not looking like his year, it seems like. I mean, yes, he had Kung Fu Panda 4, and he did a fine job with that, but here's the thing. Normally, when Jack Black is in a movie, you're guaranteed that he is at least going to give a really fun performance, and that he is going to be one of the best elements of the film. It is not often that he actively makes the movie worse, but that is the case when it comes to Claptrap, because holy fuck, I have never been more annoyed by Jack Black. And if you find a way to make someone like Jack Black, who I think is just such a energetic and charismatic actor, and just is able to bring so much fun and liveliness to pretty much any role he ends up getting, whether it be good or bad, if you find a way to make him annoying to the point where every time he is on screen, he is actively making your film that much worse, you have just failed as a director. Like, there's really no other way to look at it. You have utterly failed. But unfortunately, that is the case when it comes to Claptrap in this movie. I mean, again, they are trying so hard to make this guy like the goofy side, the like, you know, the like comedic standout of the movie. Everyone's gonna be quoting his lines. Everyone's gonna be, you know, going back and looking back at all the Claptrap things. Everyone's gonna see him as the standout of the movie. Oh my God, Claptrap's gonna get his own film. That is not gonna happen, because this character is so incredibly insufferable to watch. He's just spewing out the most like juvenile shit throughout this entire movie, trying so hard to be edgy and funny, and it just is not working at all. And again, the character, they're just trying so hard to make this character be the standout of the movie, and it just completely ends up destroying the entire film. The action here also, nothing really to write home about. A lot of it just feels very choppy. A lot of it also just feels kind of generic. I wouldn't say it's like the worst ever, but it's just not very well handled. And again, if the movie wasn't bad enough, you get to the ending of the film, and just the way everything wraps up here, it is insultingly bad. There is no point of this movie where it feels like we have gotten to a point that, again, feels satisfying. Again, pretty much everything about this film is just kind of a disaster. It's really unfortunate, because I do think that, you know, Borderlands maybe could have worked out. I'm not someone that plays the game. I don't know the source material. I don't know how well this could have worked, but I'm aiming to believe that, I'm willing to believe that there is a version of Borderlands that could have worked. We have seen a lot of video game adaptations recently succeed. You know, we had The Last of Us, we had Fallout earlier this year, which I know I haven't reviewed, but hopefully that'll be coming soon. We'll see. We had Super Mario Brothers movie last year. We've had Sonic. Like, we have had video game adaptations that have been successes in terms of, you know, working as a film or working as a show. I just think that Borderlands is one that pretty much just got stripped of any identity it had whatsoever, and as a result, it just feels like this unfinished sort of, like artificial shell of what it was supposed to be, that is trying so hard to be something special, is trying so hard to be something exciting, but again, it has gotten stripped of its identity entirely, that all you can do is just think of better movies that you could be watching, think of films that it is so clearly trying to ape off of, and isn't really trying to do anything of its own. So yeah, overall, this is just nothing short of one of the worst films of the year. I really don't have much else to say. Again, if I had done this video when this film had come out, I'd probably have a lot more to say, but months have gone on. Haven't really thought about it since then. It doesn't change the fact, though, that this film is just an absolute disaster pretty much on all fronts. So yeah, D for Borderlands. I think I've said enough really about just how much of a train wreck this entire thing was. Alright, the next one we're going to talk about, thankfully now we're back to movies I actually care about, with Cuckoo here, which I think is kind of ended up being one of the more overlooked horror films of this year, and it's kind of a shame, because I think it's a damn good one, for the most part. I mean, right off the bat, Hunter Schafer, is just incredible in this movie. She does such a great job at playing this character that is very closed off emotionally, doesn't really like to talk a lot about her previous life, but you can tell that it is very much eating away at her. She's recently had a death with her mother, and now she's kind of living with, her father and her, like, stepmother, and it's been this really rough transition for her, and you can just see how much this is just completely just how much this is having a very negative effect on her, and you kind of see that throughout the movie. But she's also someone that is trying to be this rebellious teenager of sorts and trying to go about life in the way that she can, and she does a really good job at playing that. But especially when all these strange things start to happen and you start to see her grow a lot more curious, and you have a lot of characters that are not believing what's going on. I think she just does a really great job at playing this character, especially this one scene involving this reveal of sorts that ends up going down. I thought that she just did an amazing job throughout this entire movie, and I'm just really happy to see how much success Schaefer has had outside of Euphoria. I knew, when I first saw her in that show that she was going to be something special, and it's just been really great to see the success that she's been having. She even recently got, like, a nomination for this film at like some awards. I'm not sure which one, but there was one recently where she ended up garnering a nomination for this. So I think that's pretty exciting overall. So yeah, very much enjoyed her performance in this one. I think she's a major standout. Dan Stevens, though, is fantastic in this movie. He plays this character that immediately you are very much off-put by, but you're also just very intrigued to know more about. You can tell that there's more to him that meets the eye. He's someone who is, everyone's, like, drawn to him because he's very charismatic, but again, you can also see that there's just something about him that's just really off. He has this very, like, menacing, like, interior, and I think that he just does a really good job at channeling that, especially towards the end of this movie when you start to find out more about him. He just really leans into it, and I think this is easily one of his best performances to date. I just really loved what he was doing in this film. I think that, Stevens is a really great character actor, but I also think he's great at just playing these, like, weirdos who you're just really, like, unsettled by, and I think this is easily one of his best examples of that to date, and I think also just one of his best performances in general, and I think those two performances are really good. All the other performances are definitely really good, but no one is really on the level of those two. I think that's definitely one of the best parts of this movie, but also the directing of this film is something that I think really does work really well. Tillman Singer just does a really great job at creating this this sort of vibe that is very eerie and just very sort of, you feel like something's off throughout the entire movie, but also kind of making it feel somewhat real, and as the film goes on, it starts to get more and more bizarre, and I just really like the way that he ended up And I really like the way he ended up directing this movie, especially when the film starts to channel more of its horror roots. I mean, he is very good when it comes to that. I was definitely very unsettled by a good majority of this movie, and I think a lot of that was due to his directing here, and I think that part of the film does work really well. But the cinematography also is fantastic in this film. There are many sequences here that I just could not take my eyes off of, just because of how well put together everything was. The production design in this movie also definitely needs to be commended. I think that they just do a really great job with that. Really, I think my real issue with this film, what keeps it from being a great film, because I do think this is a really good film. There's a lot of things it does dive into very well. I think the characters of Gretchen is one that you really do find yourself latching onto pretty easily. Like I said, she's going through a tragedy of sorts, and you're kind of seeing her kind of unravel throughout that, but also start to recognize that there's some sort of sinister presence, that just keeps making things worse throughout the film for her, whereas everyone else is just constantly not believing her and, trying to just downplay what she's saying and things like that. And so I think that character works really well. The problem is, I think that the writing in general is just not as strong as it needed to be. I think there are definitely elements that work really well here. When it comes to the actual, story of what's going on with Gretchen and this tragedy she's going through, I think all of that works out really well. I think the film does do a really good job of diving deep into her emotional trauma and the effect that this is. I think the film does do a really good job at diving into grief and the effect this has had on her, and how it's also put a strain on her relationship with her stepsister, someone that, she really wants to care for, but she's having a very hard time, connecting with. She also feels like there's just something about her that is off, and you can kind of see how that is really making her spiral. She has parents who she really can't have much of a relationship with just because of the way that they are going about this tragedy and the way that they are handling things versus how she is. I think all of that is really well done. And like I said, there is a scene that culminates, the culmination of all of that when we finally get the unraveling of what's actually going on. This one scene, I think, is probably the emotional peak of the entire film. It was certainly the scene that I was the most impressed by, and I think from a writing perspective, it works really well there. And I think the way they set up everything going on horror-wise also is really well done. It is one of those films where, things kind of start off kind of gradual, but at first that there just is something off here, but you're trying to get more of a sense of what it's all about, and things just keep kind of escalating for Gretchen, and they get worse and worse as the film, and they get progressively worse as the film goes on. You find yourself very intrigued. The problem for me is that I just think there are quite a few things that just feel a bit underdeveloped here. When it comes to the parents in particular, I don't think we get enough with them in this movie. There are things that end up happening, and I think initially they did a fine job at, giving us the bare minimum of what we needed to, giving us a sense of just, again, how disconnected she feels from them and why it's hard for her to maintain a relationship. Everything they do with her and her sister, I think, actually does work pretty well. I didn't really have any issue with that. The problem for me is once we get a sense of everything that's going on, and the film does actually dive a lot deeper into, what's really at play. There is a lot of information that's revealed, and we just don't really get enough of a sense of what this is really all about. What is really going on here? Why is this all happening in the way it does? We're presented all this information in the third act of the movie, and it makes the film go from 0 to 100 real fast. And I understand, because of the fact that it's the climax of the movie, you need things to reach its apex, and you need things to get really wild and batshit in the way that you're expecting a movie like this to get. And it does, and it's very effective when it does, but the problem for me is that there just isn't any time to kind of just breathe and really kind of just soak everything in. And again, there's a lot of things revealed in this third act that drastically changes how you end up, that kind of makes you recontextualize events and kind of reframe your perspective for a bunch of the character, for quite a few key elements of this movie. And there's just a few things that we end up finding out that I just felt were pretty underdeveloped, and I just felt kind of unsatisfied. I wish that the movie did a better job of hinting at things earlier on, because there are things here that just feel like they're kind of they come out of left field. There are especially some big reveals that I just really wish that they dived a lot deeper into, and I think that really is the issue for me when it comes to this movie, is that I just think that screenplay wise, it just feels a little bit underwritten at points. It feels like the movie was in such a rush to get to all the crazy stuff that it just didn't want to just take a second and slow things down and really give us a sense of, what this is really all about. What are the implications of what's going on here? I think the movie could have done a much better job at that, and I think it would have made for a more satisfying ending, because while I really did enjoy the third act of this movie, I don't think I can come away and say I was fully satisfied by the way everything went down. I really just needed a bit more clarity. I needed at least 10 to 15 more minutes just to unpack everything, just to see the effect of everything that went down. Again, the way that things were revealed, I wish that they dived a bit deeper into them, because it just feels like a little bit too much, and it doesn't feel like we really get a chance to just kind of soak everything in. So that really, I think, is like the main issue with this. Other than that, I think this film is very effective at what it ends up doing. You get some great performances here. You have some really strong directing from Tillman Singer. There's definitely points that I think are going to there's definitely points in this movie that I think are going to be a little too weird for some people. Some of the choices that go on directorial-wise are definitely things that I think people are definitely, you know, it's either going to work or not work for you, and I can definitely see it hindering the film for quite a few, but I really appreciate the audaciousness of this movie and the places that end up going. Again, I just wish some of the loose ends were tied up a bit, because there just were some things I want a bit more clarity on that we just didn't end up getting. But if you're looking for a film that really does dive into some really good psychological elements and goes in some crazy directions and also has some great performances and some really strong characters, I do think Cuckoo is mostly going to satisfy you. Again, I just wish there were some things that were dived into a bit more. But other than that, I really did enjoy this one. So B for Cuckoo. Like I said, I think this is a film that kind of went under the radar a bit, and it's kind of unfortunate because Neon just had like this big win in Long Legs, and it sucks that Cuckoo wasn't able to have the same kind of fate. But I really do think if you missed out on this one is definitely worth checking out. Okay, the next one we're talking about here is Alien Romulus, and look, this is a movie that there's been a lot of debate about, and there's no way you can possibly talk about this movie without really starting off with the thing that just there's been so much discourse with, and all this controversy, at least in the spaces that I'm in, when this film first came out, and that, of course, is the CGI of a certain actor. Look, I don't really want to say much, because, one, it's a spoiler, and for those who haven't seen the movie, I don't want to say what happens, but what I will say is that there is use of CGI in this movie that a lot of people have found very unethical. There's, you know, this level of vitriol towards it, which is understandable, just considering what they decided to do, and the fact that, like, you know, there's the question of, should this even be in the movie? What purpose does this serve? Does it really add anything? And this is what I will say, and you guys are going to think I'm absolutely insane for saying this, but this is me being honest. I saw this movie twice, and the first time I watched it, I didn't even notice it, to be honest with you. I didn't even notice the CGI that was being used. I didn't notice the technology that they were using. To me, it just looked like it just looked like any other effect in the movie. I didn't really recognize what was happening, but then when all the controversy was going on, one, I wanted to see the movie a second time because, spoilers, I actually really like this movie. Two, also the fact that, you know, this is a big subject and I want to see if I notice it more. And yeah, it definitely does stick out more. But I think, again, knowing about it, it definitely did stick out more to me. Was it ultimately necessary? No, I don't necessarily think they had to go about it in the way that they did. I think that the impact would have still worked if you had a different actor in that role. I think that definitely would have been would have been just as effective. I don't necessarily think you had to do what you did, so it does definitely feel unnecessary in that way. But again, it's also one of those things that, like, I'm not necessarily overlooking, but the rest of the movie, at least for me, is so good that, like, it just didn't stick out and be as big of an issue in the way that it was for other people. I don't really want to say much more about it other than, like I said, I completely understand all of the uproar that it's gotten. I think that it definitely is valid. For me, it just never really bothered me to the level that it has for other people. So I'm not going to sit here and rant about it for 10 minutes just because, again, to me, it really wasn't that big of an issue. I don't know if it was ultimately necessary, but it in no way hindered the film in the way it has for other people. But anyway, let's talk about the movie from, divorcing that for a second. Because, like I said, I think that's just been a huge topic conversation, has continued to be a huge topic conversation for for the rest of this year. But the movie itself, I think, is actually really damn good. What I really enjoy about Alien Romulus is that I think that, the Alien franchise is a really strange one because you have the first two movies. Everyone agrees that they're fantastic movies. They're some of the greatest science fiction works of all time. But then past that, I feel like all the other Alien films are very divided. You either have like 3 and Resurrection, which everybody hates, or there are those that do appreciate them. I'm not one of those people. I don't really like either of those movies. And then Prometheus, I actually do have a bit of respect. I actually do enjoy quite a bit. I think that it works as this really interesting sort of origin film. Alien Covenant, I'm kind of like back and forth on. There are things I like and things I don't, and that one's definitely a little bit more inconsistent for me. I think that one's a little bit more flawed. But again, I think going into Alien Romulus, what works really well about this film is how well it is able to try to do something a little bit different. We are focusing on characters that we mostly have not seen before, and I think that does actually work out pretty well. And the mission itself, it's fairly simplistic. You have these characters and they are trying to, you have these characters and they're trying to locate this space station and things like that. And, if this creature ends up wrecking havoc along the way. And I think it does actually work fairly well. It helps that the film kind of just throws you right into the chaos. I think the first act of this movie in particular is so unrelenting in terms of tension. Does a really good job at just, I think the first act of this movie in particular just does a really good job of laying the foundation and the calm that you feel, really feeling like this mission is going to go off without a hitch, and then slowly becoming a lot more tense throughout the film until the third act when it just becomes so unrelenting and insane, and we'll get into all of that. But I think the story itself I actually really did enjoy, and the characters I actually do think are fairly solid here. Our main two characters, especially Rain, I think does work really well as this character that is just really trying to do what she can to stay calm during a time when it seems kind of difficult to do so, and I think that Kaylee Spaney does do a really good job in this role, and I've really enjoyed the projects that she has attached herself to, and I think as an actress, she's always impressed me, but it's just great to see just how much she's been delivering lately. I think between this and like Civil War, she is just having such a strong year, and I cannot wait to see what other projects she ends up doing, and considering how successful this film is, I would not be against seeing this character again. I think, you're never going to replace Ripley, and this character is nowhere near that level, but I do think considering where they leave her at the end of this movie, I would definitely be down to see what else they do with her in future installments, because I really do like the arc that Rain does go throughout this film. Like I said, starting off very confident and optimistic and growing a lot more rougher around the edges as the film does go on, and I think that she just does a fantastic job here. But there's no question to me, though, that the standout of this movie, absolutely, and I'm very happy to say, is David Johnson, who plays Andy, who is just incredible throughout this entire film. And look, I've been a big fan of his. I've seen him in I saw him in Rye Lane last year, which I really loved a lot. Very overlooked movie from last year. Please watch it if you haven't. Gives such a fantastic performance in that movie. And here he's channeling something a little bit different that just continues to show, I think, why he is on target to become an absolute star. I think that Johnson is someone that I just need to see in a lot more movies because he plays such a versatile role in this film. Andy at first is someone who, he is this very like childlike presence that is this like brother figure of sorts to Rain. He's like joking around with, but he has inhabited the conscience of like her, but he's inhabited the conscience of like her father, so he's also making all these dad jokes and things like that, and he's just a very endearing character to watch and someone you really grow attached to. And so when halfway through the movie something happens to him that causes him to shift a little bit, you really are thrown off, and it really ends up and it really is a hard role to pull off, just considering how much the character does shift. And I think Johnson just really And Johnson just really rises to the occasion here, just adding so much versatility and so many different layers to this character. And I just think he does an amazing job. He absolutely is the heart and soul of this entire movie. You really find yourself latching onto the relationship between these two characters. But again, I think it's also Johnson's performance that really does elevate the material. I think the screenplay already is very good here, but I think his performance is really what does work really well. So I think all of that is very effective. I think the directing also, I was very impressed by. Fede Alvarez has always done a really good job, in terms of directing. I think that he is very good at building tension, and this film very much does continue to show that's particularly the third act of this movie. He really does go for it, and he gives us something that we really haven't seen in an Alien movie before that felt risky. It felt like it was doing something decidedly different, something that was I think pretty very inventive, and I really enjoyed what he ended up doing here directing wise. It felt like he respects the Alien films, but he also is giving it his own sort of shell, and I think he does do a really good job at directing this film, and I was very impressed by what he ended up doing. I think a lot of directors, when it has come to this franchise, they haven't really understood what to do, and I think what Alvarez understands well is what works well in these movies is that slow build. You can't really dive headfirst into the chaos. You really kind of need to ease into it, and Alvarez does that really well, and gets to a point where he Alvarez does that really well, but he also knows how to add his own sense of flair and style that we've come to know with him in other projects, and I think he also captures that very well in this movie. So I was very impressed by his directing in this film. So I think all those things do work really well in this movie. The cinematography also is phenomenal here. I mean, just the look and feel of space and this, especially early on when you see the planet that they're on and how just ruined it's become. I mean, this film is just such a marvel to behold in terms of cinematography. It's one you really can't take your eyes off of, and I think it's just really well helmed throughout. I was very impressed by the cinematography in this movie. I really enjoy the score here as well. So there's just a lot of things that do work really well in this movie. But the third act in particular is really what impressed me, because I was already really into the film, and then they introduced these new elements that just took this situation from these characters being in a very tense situation to something that felt so much more massive and kind of like these and seemed kind of impossible to get out of, and it just did such a great job of upping the stakes in such an amazing way that really just ended up blowing me away. The last 40 minutes of this movie just had me so on edge. I mean, I was just I was wincing. I was just so into what was going on. It's easily one of the most intense things I have seen in any movie this year, and that alone I think is worth the price of admission. So I think that part of the movie just really ends up working out so well. The only things I think that really do bring this down, one, I do think the way they try to connect it to Alien mostly does work, but sometimes it can come across as a little bit flimsy. There's a part of me that kind of wishes that this divorced itself a bit more, that this tried to separate itself more from the other Alien films, because I think when they try to implement the lore, sometimes it does just kind of feel like, oh, we're referencing that thing that but I didn't feel like it did it in a way that was alienating. I didn't think it did it in a way that was annoying, baffled, frustrating to watch. I think that they did do it in a way that felt mostly organic, but there are definitely some times where they're referencing things and it's okay, cool, I see what you're doing, but I really think we need to dive more into this story, because I don't really think this is, and I think the connections to some things as a result, coming out of the movie, I think there's going to be some confusion in terms of how this connects to everything. But it's not really as big of an issue as some other legacy sequels, but it definitely does suffer in some aspects. Really, my only big issue with this movie is really the fact that I just think some of these characters are not as well developed as they really needed to be. Archie Renault's character in particular, he's kind of just this love interest for Rain, but we really don't dive that deep into him. We don't really get enough of his character. Spike Fern and Eileen Wu especially, there's really not much of anything for them. And
And then there's Isabella Merced, who I do actually think has some pretty solid moments, but there are reveals as to what her character is going through that I just wish the film dived a little bit deeper into, and I think could have been just a bit more impactful as a result. But again, just considering the places that this film ended up going, how immersed I was by what was going on, but especially just how exciting this film was pretty much throughout, I think this is easily one of the stronger Alien films we've gotten. Some really great performances, some really interesting ideas with the way it tries to tie into things. I just think in general, like, you know, we've had so many Alien films that have failed to really bring something fresh and original, and this film really has done that, and I'm just hoping that moving forward, we will continue to get more Alien films like this, because I think they finally have found the correct formula. No, it does not do everything right, and I do think there are some things that are going to piss some people off, such as the thing I mentioned in the beginning, but if you are able to look beyond that, I do think this film does have a lot to offer. So overall, B+ for Alien Romulus. I don't think this is like a complete. I don't think this is as, you know, close to the level of the first two films, but I also think that is like very hard to do. I don't think we're ever going to get a movie on the level of those first two films. But considering how many Alien films we had that have just not really lived up to their potential, this one really does end up succeeding in more ways than even I ever could have imagined. Alright, so the next one I'm talking about here is a film that I feel like has gone, like, really under the radar, and it's quite unfortunate because I think it's a damn good movie, and that is Blink Twice. And look, right off the bat, there are a lot of things that work really well in this movie, but really, I mean, the thing that impresses me the most is the directing here from Zoe Kravitz, who, of course, this is her directorial debut, and it is a rock-solid one. I mean, one film in, I think that Kravitz has really asserted herself as a real talent to watch out for. I've always been a big fan of her acting-wise, but I think she really gets to show a new side of herself in this movie. What I love about her directing in this film is just how confident it is. I mean, there is a clear style already, and yes, there are, you know, certain directors that you can think that she's kind of, you know, paying inspiration to, but she really puts her own spin on it. I think the way that she builds tension is really well done here. There is this, you know, foreboding sense of uneasiness throughout this entire movie. There is this crippling sense of uneasiness throughout this entire movie, but yet she also does a great job of inserting comedy in places where you wouldn't expect it to work. She finds a way to make it work, and I think she does a really good job with that, but also just having such a clear idea of what she's trying to tackle. The way this film is diving into, you know, women and their voice being heard and the constant silence that's around them, and their, you know, them ultimately, you know, them being silenced, and how this is such an you know, consistent issue, and, you know, how hard it is to believe them and things like that. And, you know, I think it's really well done what she's trying to I think all of that is just covered really well in this movie. I think it's done in a way that, yes, we've seen this message you know, we've seen this message tackled in a lot of films recently, but I think the way that she does it here, it makes it feel fresh, it makes it feel original, and that is when you know you are in the presence of such a strong director. And again, I think just the way she's able to incorporate all these different elements, there's even a sense of horror in this movie. I think she is just such a, you know, honestly, I think that she is definitely one to watch out for. I can absolutely see Kravitz being a serious, you know, directorial force to be reckoned with in future projects, and this is just a really great example of that. So I think her directing here is just fantastic, but also the premise of this movie is one that I just really found myself invested in. We have these two girls who are basically invited to this resort of sorts, and, you know, from the moment they're there, things just kind of seem too good to be true. There's, like, you know, this attire that they're supposed to wear that's, like, perfectly fit to their size. size, which is already very strange. They're not allowed to like use their phones. They're not allowed to, they have to only drink like certain types of beverages. Like there's all these different like rules and regulations, and so from the beginning you know that there's something off going on. But what I think Kravitz does such a great job with screenplay wise here is how patient of a story this really is, because you really do find yourself getting invested in what's going on, particularly when it's through the eyes of our lead character Frida. You know, I think she is just such an interesting character to watch, because you can tell from the beginning that she is definitely haunted by something. There is something that has gone on in her past that she is finding herself hearkening back to, but she always is trying to ignore it. She's just trying to have fun. She's just trying to enjoy this time. She's constantly doubting any sort of suspicions that her friend Jess has, who she's with, and, you know, as the film goes on, she starts to become more keenly aware of what's happening, and that's really when her character becomes something special. And the way the film peels back the layers of this character especially is really well done. It seems pretty obvious from the beginning of who Frida is, but as the movie goes on, you begin to learn more about her, and you end the movie feeling much different about her character than you did at the start. And again, I think that's just a testament to the really great writing for her character. But I also think Slater Kane was a far more well-written character than I expected. I expected him to just kind of be this, like, you know, tech bro sort of douchebag who is, you know, taking advantage of these women and is trying to do it under false pretenses, is, you know, constantly talking about all the great things that he's doing, but yet clearly is like this monster. And yes, that is the character that he's playing. And Channing Tatum, can I just say, there's some great performances in this movie, but Channing Tatum in this film is an absolute revelation, because we really get to see a side of him that I don't think I've ever seen from him before. Because again, I think the way he portrays this character, he brings more layers to him than you really would expect, and in no way is he trying to make you sympathize with this character. It's more so getting you to understand the mindset of this character. What does this character think that he is doing? What is he gaining from what's actually going on? There's this monologue, especially in like the third act of the movie, and it was just absolutely riveting to watch, and a lot of that was due to Tatum's delivery, but also how much it reveals about this character and why he is the way he is. I found that to be so fascinating, the way the film dived deep into all of that, and I thought that, you know, his character was just really well written here. There's a lot of characters in this movie that I really did enjoy quite a bit, although maybe not as well developed as those two. We'll get into that more when we get into my issues with the film, but like I said, I think the writing is just really rock solid here. And also, again, the way this mystery is introduced throughout the film, like I said, it's done in a very subtle manner. For a while, things are just kind of fun, but there's always this looming darkness in the background. And when we eventually get to the moment where we figure out what's actually going on, holy shit, this film goes in some absolutely wild and some pretty uncomfortable directions. There's definitely quite a few moments that are going to be very hard for quite a few people to watch, but I think it's done in a tasteful enough manner, especially with the way the subject matter is covered, that I thought it was done in a way that worked in the film. It did not feel exploitive in that way. In fact, it felt, you know, fully centered on these characters, and especially the way they, you know, it all comes about, I thought was just really well handled. But like I said, the third act of this movie is just absolutely insane. It goes in some really wild directions that I wasn't expecting, but it is such a satisfying end as well, and I thought they did a really good job with that. I also got to shout out Adria Arjona, though, in this movie, who I don't think has gotten enough credit. She's having an incredible year between this and Hitman, and I think she gives another really strong performance in this movie. She is kind of this reality star that is kind of scoffed at by the rest of the women because they don't really take her all that seriously. They don't really see her as someone who's had to face that many challenges in her life, but because the fact that she is in this kind of environment, you can see that she's a lot more resourceful than she seems. And as we learn more about her character, she also, I thought, became, and as the film goes on, I thought she also became one of the most interesting characters in the entire film. And I thought the bond that she ends up forming in the movie eventually with Naomi Aki's character, I found to be really well handled, and I really enjoyed their chemistry throughout the film. So I thought that was definitely one of the strongest elements. The cinematography here also is just fantastic. The way this film, you know, lays the groundwork and builds the world in such an interesting way, but also the setting that you're in, you're both you're both like intrigued by what's going on, but you also feel kind of trapped there. We're not leaving this resort often, and there's a lot of things that you feel like we're not really getting to see, and I think that just adds to the suspenseful nature of this entire film. And I thought they did a really good, I thought that was something that was done really well. I really like the score in this movie, the use of soundtrack as well. There's a dancing scene that I thought was easily one of the most memorable of the entire movie. And I think the way this movie's edited is really well handled. I think the way the film dives into certain aspects, especially as we learn certain things throughout the film, I think the editing is a key part of making this film work as well as it does, because there are so many scenes that, now knowing what's actually happening, that you look at in one way, and then the way it was edited, you kind of see it in this perspective, but now knowing what's actually going on, you are seeing it in a whole new light. I thought that was just really well handled, the way that they ended up going about all of that. So there's really a lot to enjoy about this movie. Christian Slater also very good here. He's kind of like the right-hand man for Slater, and honestly, like, provides some really good dark comedy that I wasn't expecting in the third act of this movie. There's some lines that he had that honestly had me in stitches, and I thought that he was just so much fun in this movie. I feel like out of everybody, he was probably the character having the most fun. No less, no less of a terrible person in the movie. The character he's playing is an absolute asshole, but is an absolute terrible person, but yet you still find yourself really latching on to him. And again, it's Slater's performance that really does that. And Naomi Aki is so well cast in this film as well. I think that she just does a really great job at playing this character who you can tell has really been through a lot, but is trying to kind of repress that trauma. And, again, I think the way the film gets you to learn more layers about Frida, you really do find yourself latching onto this character. I think Aki is a really good reason for that. So as you can see, there's a lot that I really do love about this movie. Is there anything that really brings it down? Well, like I said, I think that while some of these characters are super well developed, there are about a half a dozen other characters in this movie that I just didn't feel as attached to. I'm talking about the other women that we meet at this resort. A lot of them just felt kind of one note to me. I didn't really feel like we got to dive as deep into their characters as I really wanted to. Some of the men as well, I felt like there was one character in particular that I really wanted to see more of. This one guy who's there who is, had a bit more beneath the surface. I wish they would have dived a bit deeper into his character, and I think that would have made the film just a little bit stronger. I also do think the movie took a little bit to get going for me. I wasn't fully invested really until we got to the resort, but again, I think on rewatch, that's definitely something that might end up being less of an issue. And then there's the ending. And the ending is one of those where I totally get what Kravitz was going for, where the movie goes in a direction that is so clear as to what it is trying to do. It is extremely powerful. It ends on this super batshit note that I was just so all in for. And it seems like the movie is about to wrap up, but then there is this extra scene that ends up happening, and I just don't really know how to feel about it. I've had a few months to really, think about it. When I first saw it, I didn't really take issue with it, but really upon thinking about it, I just don't really know if it works overall. I get what I think Kravitz is trying to say. I just don't know if this particular ending was, felt throughout the entire movie. I think that this is one of those things that maybe could have been an alternate ending. I think that it doesn't at all sour the movie. It just left me a little bit puzzled. I need a bit more clarity as to what was going on, how we really got to this point, what the overall shift was that drove us here, because it seemed pretty obvious where the movie was going to go, and then it threw this curveball of sorts, and it just kind of left me just a little bit confused as to what I was really supposed to take away from it. But other than that, I mean, this is just a very effective film that I think is one that a lot more people need to be seeking out. You got some great directing here from Zoe Kravitz, some incredible performances, a really compelling screenplay that just had me pretty much locked in the entire time, some really strong world building, a really great message at its center. This is just a film that I really think should be getting a lot more attention. I think if it didn't come out at the end of August, it probably would have gotten a lot more attention, but unfortunately that is not what ended up happening. But with all that said, I really did love this. I really did enjoy this one quite a bit, and I'm going to give Blink Twice overall a B. Oh god, we're switching gears immediately to talk about The fucking Crow. What is there to say about this one? Now, look, when it comes to The Crow, this was not a movie I was excited for at all. I'm actually not a huge fan of the original film. I don't hate it. I think that, Brandon Lee's performance is legendary. It's everything that everyone has ever said. I think that there's some really great ideas in that film. I just think the way they go about it, it's just a little too heightened and cheesy for me, and it just never fully worked in the way that it wanted to. I haven't gotten a chance to rewatch it since when I watched it in 2018, but I really wasn't that big on it. That said, I mean, the idea of them remaking a movie like this, I think, is pretty disgraceful. And also the fact that this is a movie they've been trying to make for 19 fucking years, the production history of which could, similar to Borderlands, be its own video, and maybe be even 2 videos, because it just is that extensive. Seriously, I watched a video about it recently where someone was going over everything that happened to, delay this film and constantly be through production hell, and I didn't even understand. I didn't even know the full extent of it. It's absolutely wild and definitely worth looking into, and I'm not going to get into it all here, but let's just say this film, to say this film has shifted directions a multitude of times would really be an understatement. There's been so many actors that were in the movie and then they dropped out immediately. You had directors who were attached to it and seemed passionate, and then they just dropped out of it, and it's a project that they have just failed to get off the ground ever since it was announced. So one would wonder why they would even continue to really stick to it. And after watching this movie, I still question why they thought about sticking to it, because it's fucking awful. It's every bit as bad as I really thought it was going to be. There are a few redeeming things about it. Bill Skarsgård is definitely well cast here. I think out of the people they could have gotten for Eric Draven, I think Skarsgård is definitely one of the better choices. He definitely does a good job, I think, towards the, when he really starts to dive into that more menacing and demented version of Draven, who, and someone who is just hell-bent on revenge. I think he does a really good job at portraying that. I think, especially when he gets to be this badass of sorts, I think that he does a really good job in playing that, but also in the more emotional scenes, I think he does work really well. The character himself we'll get into a little bit later, but I think that Skarsgård does more than enough to elevate the material, and I think that his performance is enough of a reason to check this out, because I do think he does do a good job. FK Twigs also not bad here. I think that she did the best with what she really did have in this movie. Again, we'll get to some of the choices they do with her in a bit, and there is one really good action sequence here at an opera house that is generally one of the most intense and just insane things I've seen in any action film this year. There is this sense of momentum. There is this sense of just relentless violence. I mean, suddenly the film is so much more gruesome and unhinged, and you really just find yourself so riveted by what's going on. There is this propulsive energy to it that you just really feel throughout this entire sequence. I mean, it is absolutely insane, and I cannot believe that sequence exists in what is otherwise such a fucking soulless, boring, and just lazy remake, because that really is the only time this film has something that is even close to a pulse. The rest of this movie is pretty much an absolute disaster, because look, what I will say about The Crow on paper is that no, this is not a shot-for-shot remake. There are some pretty key differences here, which I do appreciate, but the problem is when you're going to implement differences into a remake, they probably should have somewhat of a purpose. They probably should do something to elevate the material, you know, take things in a direction that makes the story a little bit better, expand upon things that you couldn't before. And unfortunately here, they really just don't. I mean, for example, this movie has been promoted in the trailers as trying to expand more on Eric and Shelley's relationship before she ends up getting killed. Well, in the original, it was like a shooting. Here, I don't want to say what happens, but it's fucking lame as hell. And I don't think that is necessarily a bad idea. I do think one of my issues with the original film is that I did not feel that connected to what was going on because they were just referencing things that we hadn't seen. I think the idea of getting to see these two together when they were happy, I think is a really interesting idea, and the film did kind of have me for just a little bit. I was like, okay, let's see where they go with this. And the answer is, despite the fact that even though the first like 40 minutes of this movie is focusing on these two characters, they really don't do that much with this concept. We get a little bit more information with Shelley and this whole side story with, you know, some group that she's involved with that is able to make people like suffer and feel pain and things like that, and she's now being hunted as a result. And then she's placed into this school, and that's how her and Eric meet. But like, other than that, there isn't really much substance given here that adds anything to this dynamic. It also does not help that as much as the two of them try, FK Twigs and Bill Skarsgård, they don't have any chemistry here. Like, I just did not feel the relation between these two at all. I found the connection to be extremely rushed, which is shocking because, again, they spend a considerable amount of time on building out this romance, but they really do not do a good job of convincing us why we should care. Why does this matter? Aside from the fact that the plot of the movie is him getting revenge on her, why does any of this really matter? The movie doesn't do anything more to convince you that it does that the original didn't, and I think that honestly is its biggest missed opportunity. Because for some reason, the first 40 minutes of this film, Eric's not even the main character, Shelley's the main character, and that immediately creates a problem because you know, if you've seen the original, what's going to happen to this character, and because they spend so much time centering it on Shelley's perspective, Eric, in comparison, I don't feel like I know anything about. I don't feel like we get enough time to really know this character, and when he starts to finally take center stage, I don't feel invested because the film has not done a good job of giving us the groundwork to give a shit. And so when the film is now like trying to, center more on him, I felt very disconnected from what was going on. So that's already a really big issue. But then the movie also is now trying to like build out the lore, the worlds a little bit more, give us a sense of like why he's resurrected, what he's really going through. There's this weird like afterlife that he now ventures to, and there's like this angel of sorts that's like following him around. I don't know. It's like, all it does is overcomplicate the story. I couldn't even explain it to you if I tried, but they spend so much time on it, and it very clearly is because they either A, are trying to build out a franchise here, or B, they have taken the wrong lessons from the original film, where the issue was never its simplicity. The issue was that there were things that were said to us, there were events that we just didn't get to see. Adding all this lore and mythology, it doesn't really add much of anything except just makes things overly confusing and therefore just alienated me from the entire film. The villain also is just such a joke here. He's so incredibly generic, and look, I love Danny Houston, but this guy really just needs to, like, get a new agent at this point, because the amount of films he has done recently where he has played this, like, generic villain that has no personality other than, like, a few moments, is just really sad to see. There's, like, one moment in the beginning of the film where you kind of get to see where he kind of gets to show off his, you know, how threatening he is, but other than that, he doesn't do shit throughout this entire movie. You never really feel his presence at any point in this film, and anytime he showed up, the film is infinitely worse as a result. There are many other characters in this film that, like, I'm clearly supposed to be attached to, but again, the film has not taken the time to get me to really care, so it really doesn't work. And then, like I said, once you get to that opera house sequence, it finally does feel like the movie is starting to pick things back up, but then it just dies down again, and that really is the only time I felt a sense of energy and, you know, fun throughout, or this sense of energy and this sense of, you know, real, like I said, this like, real propulsive and, like, adrenaline-fueled nature throughout this entire movie. That's really the only time I felt it was in that sequence. The rest of the film, again, is just so incredibly lazy. And then you get to the ending of this movie, and this is the other area where they really try to do something different. They really try to take a big swing here, and look, I am all for movies going in unexpected directions, but there is nothing about this ending that feels even slightly earned. I really don't know what they were thinking. To me, this kind of just felt like, hey, wouldn't it be fun if we did this? And then someone didn't tell Rupert Wyatt no and decided, okay, we'll keep that in the movie. And as a result, it just feels very unsatisfying, and it feels very forceful and honestly kind of insulting, the direction they end up going in. It just doesn't end up working at all. I found it to be just such a stupid ending, especially knowing that they wanted to continue these films. I can't even imagine where the next one was gonna go. So yeah, I mean, it's not like one of the worst films of the year, but a good movie it certainly is not. There are just so many choices here that are so baffling. You do have two admittedly good performances, and there are some moments that do work, but other than that, I mean, this film was just a complete and utter slog to get through, and I really don't even understand why they went through with this project when it really just seems like they had no fresh ideas, and any ideas that they did have just felt so half-baked and unexplored that it really just makes me appreciate the original film that much more, appreciate simplicity, appreciate the performances we got there, even some of the, appreciate the action sequences, appreciate the, again, that feeling of energy and that feeling of life that we got throughout this movie. We just don't feel that here at all, and as a result, like I said, it's just kind of a insufferable experience. So yeah, D+ for The Crow. Just a complete misfire in pretty much every sense of the word. Alright, so after God knows how many hours this video has taken, we finally reach the final film here, and what a film to end on, because it honestly is probably one of my favorite films of the entire year, and that is Strange Darling, which, holy shit, I mean, where to even begin with this film? I mean, I guess we'll just start with what works so well about it, and that, similar to a film like Blink Twice, is J.T. Molnar's directing is just absolutely extraordinary in this film. I've never really seen anything from him before, and I really do feel like we are about to see a lot more moving forward, because he really does show his style and just his overall craft as a director in this film. Yes, there are obvious nods to, like, Quentin Tarantino. That's something that you are immediately going to probably take note of here. I think especially it being non-linear and things like that, which we'll get into. Yes, you very much can make that comparison, but he very much does have his own style, and I think he just does a really good job at directing this film and going in just so many wild directions. I mean, this film starts off and you kind of feel like it's going to be this, like, this film starts off and you know immediately, like, it's going to take a dark direction, but it's all about knowing how we're going to get there. It's kind of like the Chekhov's gun, so to speak, but it's almost as if, like, the Chekhov's gun was done in a way that, you know, still finds a way to throw you off, despite the fact that you know what's going to happen. and it seems like it's gonna go in this super obvious direction, Molnar finds a way to keep you on your toes throughout the entire movie because of the way he is constantly shifting genres, because of the way he decides to direct this film. There are moments where this movie is downright hilarious. There are moments when this movie is absolutely terrifying. There are moments when this movie had me on the edge of my seat. There are moments of this movie that had me somewhat moved, and it really is due to just how incredible his hand is as a director here. I think he just has such a strong sense of style, but also such a clear vision for what he's trying to do with this film, and I think that he just does a really good job at directing this film here. I just, especially once we get to the actual reveal of what's going on in this film, I mean, he just really goes for it, and I think that he just really shows his potential as a director for sure. But his screenplay is generally one of my favorites of the entire year, because it's one that is constantly subverting your expectations, but not in a way that feels desperate, not in a way that feels unnecessary. Every turn this movie takes feels like a necessary one. There are things that are said early on and you're like, oh, I know where this is going. I know what they're doing. And no, you don't. You have no idea what direction they're going in. And that happens so many times throughout this movie. And the fact that you can have a movie like this that just seemed like it was going to take such an obvious direction, and it kept finding a way to change, to, you know, recontextualize the film in such a brilliant way, is genius storytelling. And what I think he does a really good job with here is that the movie is fairly small scale. We're focusing on these two people. They meet on a date. They are from a dating site, and they're like, you know, going on it. You know, they're together, and it seems like things are going to take a dark direction, and then something else happens, and you find out more information. And what I think Molnar does a really good job with is, again, you know, laying out those puzzle pieces and making it seem like you know what the story is going to be, but also really taking advantage of the way he decides to tell this story. I don't think you could tell this film in a linear fashion. I think if you did, the film would simply just lose its impact because of the fact that we know from the beginning what we are headed towards. The film is that much more suspenseful, and you are that much more invested in what's going on. Every action, every conversation, I mean, you are just laser focused on what is happening. And again, that is just an example of just a really fantastic screenwriter when he knows exactly what he is doing. And even when we're cutting away from certain moments, you know, he still finds a way to keep it riveting and exciting. There's one moment in this movie that is just a character making breakfast, and it is one of the most wholesome and somewhat, satisfying things I think I've ever seen. And it's because of the fact that he pays so much close attention to it and really is just so patient as a writer. He doesn't try to rush anything. He really gives you a chance to, like, ease into it. And I think that was something that was just so well handled here. And it is really one of those films where, like I said, you will change your perception throughout the entire movie. The way I felt about this film was drastically different than how I felt towards the end of it, and I just really love the story that he was trying to tell. I think the directions that this film ends up going, it's really not in any way that you expect it to, and like I said, I think his screenplay is just absolutely terrific here. The other thing this film does so brilliantly is the way it lures you into, like, this false sense of security. There's a point in this movie where you do feel like, I kind of have this all figured out. I kind of feel like I know where it's gonna go, and you really don't. And I think that's what works so well about this film, is that it is not one of those movies where it just feels like it is intentionally subverting your expectations to make itself seem better than it is. No, it actually does earn those moments because of how well it does at completely just fooling you and making you think this is the type of movie you're watching, and instead doing this rug pull and making the film that much more exciting as a result, that much more of a special experience that you truly are never going to forget. I mean, the directions this movie goes in are ones that I think filmmakers just dream of doing, and the fact that Molnar is able to do this so early on in his career just really makes me hopeful for what I really am just really makes me excited for what I hope is a very long and very successful career from him moving forward, because I really do think he has it in him to become one of our great filmmakers of this generation. Generally one of the most shocking and just well executed films of the entire year. The dialogue also is just really fantastic here. Just some really great lines that I've continued to think about long after seeing this movie. But the performances also are just spectacular in this film, particularly when it comes to that of Willa Fitzgerald, who is a fucking revelation in this movie. I mean, if it were up to me, there is no reason why she should not be up for like all the major awards right now, because the type of performance that she is giving in this movie is the kind that we would constantly is the kind that deserves that type of recognition. I mean, she starts off this movie, and it seems fairly obvious where she's going to go. But as the film goes on, there's more and more layers that are revealed about her, and it adds so much complexity to her character. And Fitzgerald finds a way to take an already really well-written character and elevate it to the highest degree in such an amazing way, to where you find yourself just so fascinated and intrigued by this character, but yet also really just re-questioning everything you thought you knew, and is really responsible for some of the film's most satisfying scenes. I mean, again, I think just the type of performance she gives in this film is just absolutely extraordinary. There is so much that is required of her that you aren't going to be expecting. She's the kind of character that just has so many complexities and layers to her, and in a lesser actor would find a way to make it feel kind of cheesy, make it feel unsatisfying, but Fitzgerald finds a way to make all of it just fit like a glove, and I was just so impressed by her performance in this film. It's one of those performances where you cannot take your eyes off her. It's so commanding, and it's just begging your attention throughout the entire film, but especially as the film goes on. I mean, she just does some incredible work here, particularly in the third act of this movie. She really gets to show her chops as an actress, and I was just so impressed by what she was doing here. Like I said, this is an extremely versatile role. It is not at all an easy one to pull off, and she really just rose to the occasion in the best way possible, and I think gives one of the best performances of the entire year. Now, with that said, I mean, as great as Fitzgerald is, do not in any way dismiss Kyle Gallner's performance, because it also is a very tough performance to go about here, because the way his character is written, he has this menace, but he also has this sort of charismatic nature to him that you just find yourself really drawn to, but also are really but also feel very uneasy about, because of the directions that you think his character is going to go, because of what it seems like his character is going to do, and he just does a great job, again, of providing so much nuance and so much intrigue to this character that you really just find yourself so invested in throughout the entire movie. All the performances here are really good. I also do want to mention Ed Begley Jr., who I thought was fantastic here. I really enjoyed his performance throughout this movie. I don't think he has gotten enough praise. As well as Barbara Hershey, I thought was also just really good here. They are this couple that are definitely a little bit on the weirder side, but they're characters that I think you easily find yourself very drawn to. They're not in the movie all that much, but when they were here, I really did like them, and I thought that they were some of the highlights of the film. So again, I think all the performances are just fantastic here. But I gotta talk about the cinematography, because the cinematographer of this film, this is not just some average cinematographer. This is not just some, DP that we've never heard of before. No, the cinematographer of this movie is fucking Giovanni Ribisi, of all people. And yeah, that Giovanni Ribisi, the one who is usually in a lot of like raunchy comedies and things like that. But I gotta say, as good of an actor as he is, I think this might be his talent. I really do think this is the thing he needs to stick to, because he just has such a steady hand when it comes to not just shot composition, but the way he decides to frame certain shots, the way he lingers on certain moments throughout the film, especially when it comes to building tension. As good as JT Molnar is, I think Ribisi's cinematography is the reason why this film is as riveting as it is. The way he lingers on certain moments and, presents present certain information, I think is just so well handled in this movie. The film makes it pretty clear from the beginning it was shot on like 35 millimeter. And I think that, you know, that was also a very wise choice. He did a really good job at, again, just the way he helms the camera here. He really is just so good at different compositions here. The final shot of this film in particular is one that is easily one of my favorites of the entire year. I've not been able to stop thinking about it since seeing it. He knows exactly when to pull the camera, you know, when to pull the camera in on something and when to pull the camera out, and I think he just does such a great job with that. And again, really just adds to that sense of anxiety that you're already feeling throughout this entire movie. He just finds a way to kind of amplify that. And I think when when you're able to do that just through cinematography, you know you have some of the, you really do have someone great on your hands. And I really do think, like I said, moving forward, as good of an actor as Ribisi is, I do think he needs to seriously consider becoming a full-time cinematographer, because he really does know what he's doing. I think the score here also is very good. When it's in the movie, it's not in the film that much, but whenever it is here, it is very effective. And the editing, like I said, I think the non-linear structure of this film just really ends up working to its benefit. So there's a lot of things that I just really love about this movie. I think the only thing that brings it down for me, there are just a few bits of information that are introduced to us early on that are introduced to us, and then we find out more information towards the end of this movie. And I really just wish we got a little bit more of a chance to see it play out, see the direction it was going to go in, give us a little bit more context to some things, and I think it would have made the film that much more effective. But really, I mean, this is just such an absolute thrill ride that really just had me in awe the entire time. It's one of those movies that, like, you go into it and, like I said, you think it's going to be this really exciting film, and it is that, but it is something that is so much more shocking and goes in a multitude of directions that I don't think anybody is really going to be expecting. It takes you to places that you're not expecting to, and it's one of those kind of movies that just really reminds me how much I love cinema. Like, when it comes down to film, like, this is exactly the kind of movie that I just completely eat the fuck up and just had me so invested the entire time. It is easily one of my favorite films of the entire year. I really, really do wish more people were talking about it. I'm happy that it did get the release that it did, but I don't feel like this film got as great of as strong of a push as it really could have, because it really, I think, is one of the best of the entire year, and a film that really just demands to be seen by pretty much everybody. You think you know what you're going into, what you're getting yourself into, but you leave the film so much more just surprised by what the journey it really does take you on. It's the kind of puzzle box that you really only get every once in a while. Most movies like this end up falling flat because it's pretty obvious to tell where they're going, but this one really is something special that I think just more people really do need to check out. So yeah, I think I've said enough. Strange Darling absolutely gets an A. Oh my god, we finally made it to the end of this video. Look, I know that this was much longer than I expected to be. I mean, I literally started doing this video in, like, September, and it took me all the way until the end of, it took me all the way until now to get this video done, and it wasn't intentional. I think I just underestimated how long this was really going to take, but I'm glad I was able to get it done. I was, hoping to talk about some of these movies, and I'm happy to do that. I do have another catch-up video I do have another catch-up video planned. I'm hoping that one's going to be a little bit more on the shorter side, but we will really just have to see how that one turns out. That's going to be all the movies that I didn't get to review from September to the beginning of November. But from then on, I plan to do individual movie reviews from this point forward. Aside from that, I have a bunch of other reviews that will be coming very soon. I'm, finishing up the end of the season of Survivor. I have some other TV show reviews coming very soon, so if you're into any of that, definitely consider checking out my channel. Would love to have you be a part of all of that. But that's really it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys thought of any of these movies that I discussed. Love your thoughts on all of that. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys later. Okay, bye.